Romantic Tales. Chapter 37. Li understands. Please don't worry, grandmother. Yili stood up and responded. Wang Shi's face was a little pale. It was the responsibility of the mistress of the house to maintain relationships. If it was in Yi Li's personal name it would be fine. But in the name of the Yi family she asked Yi Li to do it. It was clearly embarrassing her as the mistress of the house. Old Madame Yi did not give her a chance to speak. She frowned and said, if you have time, you might as well take care of Immerse's dowry. Don't forget that there are not many days left before the wedding. Yes. Wang Shi responded timidly. Master, Old Madam. Old Madame Yi's nanny hurried in. She deliberately looked at Yi Li before walking to Old Madame Yi and said, Old Madam, young Master Su and the second, third, fourth and fifth young masters of the Su family are here to visit. What? Minister Yi was so shocked that he jumped out of his chair. The young masters of the Su family came to visit at the same time. Didn't that mean that his troublesome brother-in-law had also arrived in the capital? Of course, with Master Su's pride he would never personally visit the Yi family who killed his only baby sister. Old Madame Yi reacted quickly and said, Quick, invite the young Master Su in. Yi Li was also a little surprised. She did not know that her uncle and cousin had arrived in the capital and did not go to greet them. This made Yi Li feel a little guilty. When her uncle was still in the capital he doted on her the most. After not seeing him for so many years, even Yi Li did not know what to do. Grandmother, Li will go and greet them personally. Old Madame Yi nodded and said, Go. Shanolin go too. She ignored Yi Lin and Yi Shan's surprise and Yi Ying's dissatisfaction. She also did not care what Old Madame Yi was thinking. Yi Li got up and walked out quickly. Yi Lin and Yi Shan behind her also quickly followed. Only Yi Ying was left looking at Minister Yi unwillingly. She was the future Princess Li. Why should she go and greet Yi Li's cousin? Minister Yi had a headache. This daughter of his was really spoiled too much. Seeing Minister Ye's expression, Yi Ying knew that her father was really angry. She had to bite her lips and turn around to follow Yi Li and others. Before Immerse's wedding, let her come to Rongla Hall every day to serve me, her grandmother. Old Madame Yi looked at Wang Shi and said coldly, This daughter-in-law still has many things to tell I'm afraid. Wang Shi said uneasily. You teach. Look at what you've taught them all these years. Old Madame Yi said coldly. They don't know when to advance or retreat. Just because she had some talent and looks she didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. These are nothing in the boudoir, but once you get married you will have to take charge of a manor. Can those poems, songs, dances and schemes that you taught be enough to support the Li Palace's reputation? Minister Yi nodded and said, Mother is right. Jiaoyin Yang was personally taught by her mother. It is Immerse's fortune that mother is able to give her some advice. Seeing that her husband had agreed without hesitation with an irrefutable expression, Wang Shi could only helplessly endure it. Recently those little bitches have been restless, especially that concubine Mother Zhao. She didn't have time to care about Immerse matters. At the gate of the Yi mansion, two handsome youths came down from the carriage. The youth in front glanced at the housekeeper waiting at the gate of the Yi mansion and a trace of dissatisfaction flashed in his eyes. He clicked his tongue and smiled at the people in the carriage. It seems that Big Brother's face is not enough. No one came to pick us up. The youth who came down behind him and was 2 years older glanced at him and said, Did Big Brother let you come to show off? The youth didn't care and made a face at his brother. Who cares? I'm here to see Sister Li. Su Qingyan, pay attention to your etiquette. Someone in the carriage said lightly. Su Qingyan blinked at his brother and complained in a low voice. Second brother is fiercer than Big Brother. Su Qingbai rolled his eyes at him. If you know he's fierce, why do you keep provoking him? The head steward of the Yi residence looked awkwardly at the two young masters of the Su family who were talking to each other. These two young masters obviously treated his invitation to the young masters as a passing wind and had no intention of entering, not to mention the young masters who were still sitting in the carriage and had not even seen them. Just as he was hesitating whether or not to go forward and invite them, Yi Li's excited voice came from the gate behind him. Is it fourth cousin and fifth brother? Su Qingbai turned to look at the girl in green who came out quickly. His gaze changed from a bit of a stranger to a warm smile when Yi Li came closer. Li, I'm fourth brother. Do you remember me? Yi Li nodded slightly. Su Qingbai was the closest to her among the 5 children of the Su family. He was only 1 year older than her. So he was the closest to her when they were young. When she lived in the Su family, the 2 of them also studied and played together. 4th brother. Big sister Li I'm Qingyan. Su Qingyan didn't want to be left behind and came forward. Li looked at the handsome youth in front of her and smiled. 5th brother has grown up. You really look like eldest aunt. That year when we left the capital, 5th brother was still a child. Su Qingyan's handsome face fell. Big sister Li bullied me. Big brother, 2nd brother and cousin. 3rd brother? The curtain of the carriage behind them was lifted and Su Qingfeng jumped down from the carriage. Fortunately, Li still remembers 3rd brother. Otherwise, 3rd brother would be jealous. 2 young men came out of the carriage. They were the Su family's eldest son, known as the #1 scholar in the world, Su Qingchen, and the Su family's 2nd son, Su Qingze. Liger. Su Qingchen was dressed in white. When he saw Li, his handsome face was dyed with a faint smile. Compared to Su Qingchen's handsome and elegant appearance, the 19-year-old Su Qingze had a more serious and solemn expression. He gave off a cold and distant feeling, but Li could also feel the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. Big brother, 2nd brother. Li softly called out. She didn't know why, but her eyes were somewhat sour. A strange feeling of not knowing what to do surrounded Li, who had always thought that she could handle it with ease. Even though there were many sisters in the Yi family, Li had always felt that she was alone. But suddenly there were so many brothers by her side. It was as if she had returned to the time when her mother hadn't passed away and her uncle and grandfather hadn't left the capital. It was as if she had returned to her previous life. Although there was no end to the fighting, it still made people feel warm. Su Qingchen raised his hand and stroked the hair by Li's ear. He softly sighed and said, Li has suffered these years? Li repeatedly shook her head. Her throat seemed to be choked by something and she couldn't say a word. 3rd sister, it's rude to let these cousins stand at the door. It's better to quickly invite them in. Ying stepped forward and gently said to Li. Then she gracefully bowed to Su Qingchen. Greets cousin Qingchen. Su Qingfeng rubbed his nose and stood behind his 2nd brother. He had come to the Yi family many times, but the arrogant Ying had never been so polite to him. Chapter 38. Ying's expression changed slightly and she forced a smile. Li quickly calmed down and smiled at Su Qingchen. Li has been rude. Eldest brother, let's go in. Father and grandmother are waiting for cousins and 5th brother. Su Qingchen nodded. Beside him, Su Qingze waved his hand. The servants of the Su family waiting at the side took out the gifts they had brought from the carriage behind them and respectfully followed behind their master to the gate of the Yi residence. Li followed beside Su Qingchen and Su Qingze and asked softly, Eldest brother, how are eldest uncle and aunt? Su Qingchen nodded and smiled. Mother stayed in Yunzhou. Father is fine, he's just a little tired from the journey. He'll be fine after some rest. Eldest uncle and cousins came. Why didn't they tell Li so that Li could welcome them? Li complained softly. Su Qingfeng, who was walking behind them, laughed and said, You can't blame me. It was eldest uncle who sent a letter in advance and forbade anyone from receiving them. My father only found out when eldest uncle and eldest brother moved to another residence in the capital. He even threw a huge tantrum. Li also knew that eldest uncle didn't like formalities and didn't mind. She smiled and said, Then I'll go visit eldest uncle tomorrow. How are Mother Lin and Mother Wei? They're fine. Mother Lin and Mother Wei are the most loyal to aunt. Their families are also willing to follow you to the Ding residence. That's why grandfather let their families follow you. Su Qingze said. Li nodded and didn't say anything polite. She felt even more guilty towards her grandfather. She had never been able to make him happy, yet she still had to make her grandfather worry about her at his age. Su Qingchen looked down at her and patted her shoulder lightly. Don't think too much. As long as you're well, grandfather will be happy. I know. Li said. Yi Lin and Yi Shan watched as a few handsome men escorted Li away. They then looked at Ying, who had a gloomy expression on her face. After exchanging glances with each other, Yi Lin looked at Ying and asked carefully, 4th elder sister. Those people are 3rd elder sister's cousins? Ying raised her head and glared at her fiercely. Yilin could not help but take a step back when she saw the ruthless expression that she had never seen before. She almost bumped into Yishan behind her. Ying sneered and looked at her with disdain. You should give up now. What kind of family is the Su family? They won't take a fancy to you. After saying that, he didn't care about Yilin's expression and turned to follow her. Yilin was taken aback by Yi Ying's words. Her delicate face instantly turned red. Thinking of Yi Ying's meaning, he felt ashamed and embarrassed. Yishan looked at her and shook her head. He's in a bad mood. Who asked you to provoke her? Sco. Grandmother won't be happy if we're late. Yilin didn't expect Yishan, who always went her own way, to comfort her. Seeing that the others were almost out of sight, she quickly followed with Yishan. Ronglating greetings to old Madam and uncle. Su Qingchen went forward to greet old Madam Yi and Minister Yi. Then the others followed. Old Madam Yi looked at the 5 men standing in the hall. Su Qingchen, who had been famous for a long time, was handsome and gentle. Even Su Qingyan, who was only 13 years old, was handsome and well-mannered. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she had to admit that the Su family was better at teaching children than the Yi family. Old Madame Ye's eyes flashed and she quickly smiled. We're all family. Let's dispense with the formalities. How's your father? Su Qingchen stood up and replied gracefully and calmly. Father is doing well. It's just that he's tired from the journey and couldn't come to visit you. Please forgive him. Although she knew he was just being polite, old Madame Yi couldn't say more. She just smiled and said, It's a tiring journey. You should have a good rest. Rong, come and greet your cousin. Yi Rong stood beside Wang Shi. He wanted to say something, but he saw his father staring at him sternly. Then he reluctantly went forward and said, Rong greets cousin. Yi Rong was not a scheming person. He didn't even do a good job on the surface. He didn't like Yi Li naturally, he didn't like Yi Li's cousin. So even though he was warned by his father and grandmother before, he still couldn't completely hide his expression. Even when they were greeting each other, there was a hint of indifference and perfunctory in their actions. Minister Ye's face darkened again. Su Qingyan curled his lips and turned his head without saying anything. Anyway, he was the youngest. It wasn't his turn to speak. Su Qingchen acted as if he didn't see Yi Rong's expression. His smile was still warm and polite and even a little bit more amiable. Yi is too polite. I heard that Ye's literary talent is quite good. Qingyan and Yi are the same age. Qingyan is very naughty. If you have nothing to do, you can walk around more. Su Qingyan was mad. Who wanted to walk around with him? But on the surface he didn't dare to refute Su Qingchen at all. He obediently showed a friendly smile. Big brother, you're right. I must learn more from Yi. Su Qingchen was very satisfied with his brother's obedience. Later he asked people to send gifts for Yi Rong and the Yi family. Yi Rong suddenly had a better impression of Su Qingchen. Compared with Su Qingfeng, who always picked on him, threatened him and despised him, Su Qingchen, who didn't look down on him at all, was simply too likable. Su Qingyan, who was forced to make friends, quietly flashed to Su Qingbai's side. He secretly poked his arm and then gave him a puzzled look. Why does big brother like this fool? Su Qingbai's eyes were upright and fair, because he's stupid enough. How could an idiot think that his big brother would really like the Yi family except for his cousin? The possibility was even lower than that his big brother wouldn't make things difficult for Prince Ding, okay? The young masters of the Su family, led by big brother Su Qingchen, had a cordial meeting with Minister Yi and old Madam Yi. As for Wang, who sat on the side and couldn't get a word in several times, she was deliberately ignored. The 5th young master of the Su family later said that he didn't like to talk to other people's concubines. That's right, in the eyes of the Su family, they had never recognized Wang's status as the legal wife. Not to mention the grudge between Wang and the late Madame Su, the Su family itself didn't recognize concubines as the legal wife. Of course, this might also have something to do with the fact that no one in the Su family took in a concubine, except for a few rare cases. If Wang was really a virtuous and thrifty lady, they could still give a certain degree of respect. Unfortunately, Wang obviously didn't have these virtues. After that, Su Qingchen very tactfully and politely mentioned that his father missed his niece, who he hadn't seen for many years, and asked to take Yi Li to the Su family's residence for a while. Old Madame Yi naturally refused without thinking, and said that Yi Li was about to get married and needed to stay at home to wait for the wedding. Su Qingchen said that because his aunt died early, his grandfather was afraid that his cousin would be looked down upon by her husband's family after she got married. He especially asked his second aunt to invite the best housekeeping madams in the capital to teach her. He also sent a few nannies to teach his cousin etiquette. After all, it was said that the third daughter of the Yi family had no talent, no virtue, and no appearance. It could be seen that his cousin needed to be taught strictly, whether it was etiquette, bearing, or speaking. Chapter 39. Seeing old Madame Yi shut her mouth with a look of bitterness that she couldn't say. Yi Li was once again sure that when dealing with an old woman like old Madame Yi, she absolutely couldn't shed all pretense of cordiality and confront her with force. Seeing her own cousin speak so elegantly and courteously, who wouldn't believe that this was definitely a gentle and courteous junior respectfully listening to the elder's opinion? But looking at old Madame Ye's expression that definitely couldn't be called beautiful, could she really give any opinion? Even in the end, when old Madame Yi wanted Yi Shan and Yi Lin to accompany Yi Li to the Su family's side courtyard, her idea was rejected by Su Qingyan with a smile on his face, saying that men and women shouldn't be so close to each other. It would affect the reputation of the two young ladies. She could only helplessly watch as Yi Li was led out of the Yi family's main gate by the several young masters of the Su family. Once they left the Yi family, everyone was clearly much more relaxed and casual. Even Su Qingze, who always had a cold face, revealed a faint smile. The unfamiliarity between the siblings that had been separated for many years seemed to disappear in an instant. As for Su Qingyan, who was too young and didn't have an impression of Yi Li, he was very familiar with her. In a short while they were intimate, as if they had grown up together as siblings. Because the current head of the Su family, Su Qingchen, Su Qingbai, Su Qingyan's father and Yi Li's uncle, Su Hongyu, didn't want to be too conspicuous, so he didn't live in his younger brother's imperial censor manor. Instead, he directly lived in a small side courtyard of the Su family in the capital. Therefore, Yi Li and the others directly went to the Su family's side courtyard. "Uncle," seeing the middle-aged man in front of her who was still elegant and gentle, Yi Li called out hoarsely. Su Hongyu also looked at this little niece that he had doted on since childhood. Seeing that face that was 70% similar to his sister, who had passed away early and was a bit stronger than her sister, he couldn't help but sigh softly. He waved his hand at Yi Li and said, "Lear, you've worked hard these years. Uncle knows about the matters in the capital. With Uncle around, let's see who still dares to make things difficult for you." Yi Li also felt that her eyes were somewhat sore. She forced a smile and said, "With second uncle around, who dares to make things difficult for Lear?" "Lear just misses uncle and grandfather." Su Hongyu glanced at his brother with some dissatisfaction and said, "If he was useful, would the mother and daughter of the Yi family be so smug?" Su Hongyan also knew his brother's temper. He could only helplessly smile bitterly and said, "Big brother is right. It's your younger brother who didn't take good care of Lear." "Uncle." Yi Li shook her uncle's arm unwillingly. She didn't feel any pressure to act coquettishly in front of her uncle. After all, she had been like this since she was young. Who asked her to be a real child at that time? Moreover, he was the only child in the entire Su family who was not afraid of first uncle. Su Hongyu lovingly rubbed the back of Yi Li's head and said with a smile, "All right, uncle was just saying. I haven't seen you for so many years, but you only care about your second uncle." "That's not true. Lear has always missed uncle and grandfather. Then when your grandfather wants you to go to Yun, you still dare to refuse." After chatting with her two uncles for a while, Su Hongyu had Su Qingyan bring her to the room that had already been prepared. At the same time, she could see the two mamas who had been waiting for a long time. Yi Li also knew that her uncle and cousin probably had something to talk about. She obediently followed Su Qingyan. Yi Li's room had already been prepared. It was in a quiet and secluded courtyard in the innermost part of the residence. The residence of the Su family, whether it was the imperial censor's residence or the former Su residence in the capital, was all simple and elegant. It also suited Yi Li's feelings very well. As soon as she stepped through the door, someone immediately came up to greet her. "Miss?" Two mamas dressed in plain clothes came up to greet her. When they saw Yi Li, they couldn't help but be stunned. Their eyes filled with hot tears. "Mama Lin." "Nanny." Yi Li called out. Mama Lin was a personal maid who had followed her mother since childhood. She was almost 50 years old this year. Yi Li's nanny was also a child of the Su family. She was also 40 years old this year. Yi Li still remembered that when she forcibly sent Mama Lin and Mama Wei back to the Su family, the two of them knelt in front of her and begged her. They would rather die than leave. Since then, until she met Qing Shuang, there had been no one she could trust around her. However, Yi Li didn't regret it. Because she was very clear that at that time, she had just recovered her memory and her mind was still in a mess. Moreover, her body was also very weak. It was impossible for her to protect these two people who were sincerely good to her. Miss. The two mamas quickly walked to Yi Li. Mama Lin said with tears in her eyes, "Miss has finally grown up? You look so much like Miss Wei." Mama's feelings for Yi Li were even deeper. After all, she was the one who personally took care of Yi Li since she was young. Sob. "I'm sorry, eldest Mississippi. I've left eldest Miss alone in the Yi residence for so many years. Fortunately, Miss is fine." Yi Li sighed in her heart. She was still a little clumsy to deal with such a situation. She could only persuade the two mamas clumsily. Su Qingyan looked at Yi Li's somewhat stiff appearance and secretly laughed. At the same time, he was sure that the Yi family had mistreated his cousin. Ahem. "Mama Lin, Mama Wei, you will be with Sister Li in the future. It's not very soon. Why don't we go inside and talk slowly?" After being reminded by Su Qingyan, the two mamas quickly wiped their faces and nodded repeatedly. "Fifth young master is right. We were careless. Quick, Miss, see if you like your room. If you don't like it, we can change it." Watching Yi Li being pulled away by the two mamas, Su Qingyan, who had been forgotten, was stunned for a moment. He rolled his eyes at the sky and turned to walk out. Yi Li was pulled into her room and received the enthusiasm of the two mamas. On the other side of the courtyard, the atmosphere in the study was somewhat cold. Su Hongyu sat behind the desk and looked at his younger brother. The smile on his lips made Su Qingfeng and Su Qingbai, who were hiding behind him, couldn't help but shiver. So, His Highness Prince Li thinks that Li is not worthy of him and turned to seduce the Yi family's fourth young Mississippi. And the Emperor thinks that Li's reputation of 3,000 to 5,000 gold and the shame of being abandoned by Prince Li can be used to humiliate Prince Ding? Everyone's lips couldn't help but twitch. Seduce. Eldest uncle, you are a great scholar. Can't you speak more elegantly? Su Hongyan nodded and said, "It is indeed so." As if he still felt that the atmosphere in the study was not low enough, Su Qingchen, who was sitting at the lower end, had a smile that was even more graceful than his father's as he took out a letter from his sleeve and said, "Just earlier today, Li Wang publicly stated at Chuxiang Pavilion that no matter how much Li tries to please the crowd, he will definitely not marry her." Shiver. Su Qingyan, who had just slipped in, inconspicuously moved behind his fourth brother. Su Hongyu took the letter and looked at it for a while. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just as Su Hongyan was about to speak with some worry, he heard Su Hongyu laugh and say, "Not bad. You are truly worthy of being my Su family's daughter." As he said this, he directly handed the letter to Su Hongyan. Su Hongyan's lips twitched as he tried not to laugh. He had always stayed in the capital. How could he not know that this niece of his was definitely not as elegant as she appeared to be on the surface? But to be this fierce was rare. She was probably really provoked by Prince Li. Chapter 40. Prince Ding was there? Su Hongyan folded the letter and put it in his sleeve, ignoring Su Qingyan, who was still waiting for him. He had to go back and study how to add more information to Prince Li. Sure enough, he was too idle to find trouble with Li. Li seemed to have talked with Prince Ding. They seemed to have reached some kind of agreement. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. Su Hongyu thought for a moment and waved his hand. "Your grandfather thinks highly of Prince Ding. Li doesn't seem to be dissatisfied with the marriage. Qingchen, I'll leave the rest to you." Su Qingchen nodded and smiled. "I understand. I've been away from the capital for many years and haven't seen Prince Ding for a long time." When Yi Li arrived at the Su family, she found out that Su Qingchen didn't just say that to brush off Madame Yi when he said that she needed to learn a lot of things. In fact, on the second day Yi Li stayed at the Su family's residence, second aunt personally asked Duchess Hua to teach her how to manage the household and how to interact with the nobles. In addition, an old maid from the palace taught Yi Li the etiquette and rules of the palace. Every afternoon, Su Hongyu would personally explain some strategies to Yi Li, and then Su Qingchen would teach her how to appreciate antiques and treasures. He would also give her a detailed breakdown of the various powers in the capital. Yili had always thought that she had lived longer than others, so she should have learned a lot. Now she knew that in the eyes of her uncles and cousins in the Su family, she was still far from being an excellent lady. Thus, Yili began to take all sorts of exams just like how she did in her previous life. She strived to memorize as much knowledge as possible from her uncle's teachings within a short span of a month. Miss Qin is here. Yili was sitting in the pavilion playing chess with Su Qingbai. Su Qingyan was watching from the side. Qing Shuang came in to report. These days not only was Yili forced to learn, but Qing Shuang and Qing Xia who came with her were also taught by Mother Lin. Although it had only been a short time, Qing Shuang had become much more mature than before. Su Qingyan's eyes lit up and he said with a smile, "Ah? My future second sister-in-law?" Su Qingbai put down the chess piece and smiled at Yili. "Since there are guests here, let's continue tomorrow." Yili was more than happy to oblige. Compared to Go, she actually preferred Chinese chess. From Yili's point of view, Go was a game that placed a lot of emphasis on feelings. It required a macro strategy, a silent strategy, and mutual infiltration. Chess, on the other hand, was much faster. Horses and spears could be swung and weapons could be exchanged. In Yili's heart, it was still the same as it was in her previous life. She liked the feeling of pleasure even more. As Su Qingbai put down his pieces, Yili raised her head and smiled. "I'm not good at playing Go. I'm afraid that fourth brother has already lost his patience, right?" Su Qingbai stood up and shook his head with a smile. "Compared to Xiao Wu, I'd rather play with you." Xiao Wu was the Su family's #1 Go addict. Go idiot. He was terrible at playing Go, but he was still obsessed with it. It was a pity that even the servants in the Su family disdained to play Go with him. Hearing Su Qingbai's words, Su Qingyan looked at Yili with a mournful expression. Yili couldn't help but twitch her mouth. She really didn't know if fourth brother was praising her or insulting her. Qin Zheng was quickly invited in, and Su Qingbai also took Su Qingyan out. "Li it seems like you're doing well in the Su family?" Qin Zheng stood outside the pavilion and smiled at Yili. Yili's face was ashen as she pulled Qin Zheng in. "I never knew that I still had so many things to learn." Qin Zheng covered her mouth and snickered. "Auntie passed away early, so you naturally have more to learn. Which one of us didn't grow up from elementary school? Moreover, you're not marrying into an ordinary family but into the Ding royal estate. You can't blame Uncle Su and the rest for being so meticulous." Yili thought of the 2 military strategy books that she still had in her study and couldn't help but frown. Those who didn't know would think that she wasn't getting married but going to war. However, compared to the books that Mother Lin and the wet nurse brought, Yili wisely chose the more practical and interesting military strategy books. Let's not talk about this. Has my biological sister seen my second brother?" Yili asked Qin Zheng with a smile. Qin Zheng was slightly surprised and glared at Yili before saying in a low voice, "Eldest young master and second young master have both gone out." Yili sighed regretfully. That meant that she hadn't seen them. After thinking about it, she leaned over to Qin Zheng's side and laughed softly. "It's okay, they will come back." Looking at her meaningful smile, Qin Zheng's face turned even redder. She was so angry that she reached out to pinch her. Yili hurriedly begged for mercy while dodging. Sister Qin, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Have mercy." Qin Zheng glared at her fiercely again before saying, "You girl. Why didn't you feel anything when you saw Prince Ding that day?" Yili's calm performance that day had left a deep impression on Qin Zheng. Qin Zheng compared her unsettled mood and couldn't help but feel depressed and uneasy. Yili touched her nose in embarrassment. How could she have the nerve to tell the young girl in front of her that she was already past the age of blushing when facing a handsome guy? Cough cough about this, just be normal. It's nothing. It's everyone's first time meeting each other and no one is worse than the other. Yili persuaded. Qin Zheng angrily rolled her eyes at Yili. She finally understood that Yili, this weirdo, didn't understand the delicate and beautiful thoughts of a girl. Yili cried out, "Who doesn't understand?" While Yili was living a busy and happy life in the Su family's residence, the Yi family and the Li palace were in deep water. The matter of that day at Chu Xiong Pavilion spread through various channels in the capital. Of course, there were all kinds of conjectures from the masses. There were even people in the gambling houses who were betting on when Li Wang would abandon fourth young Miss Yi again. The news of Li Wang and Princess Xixia's affair also inexplicably spread. The princess of Nanzhao and the prince of Dechu state fell in love at first sight, but because of their respective identities they separated. The princess's old love was hard to forget, but the lover who came from thousands of miles away already had another beauty in his arms. Such a sad love tragedy, it was almost written into a storybook and sung in the tea houses and wine shops. Because of this, Yi Ying found Mo Jingli to complain tearfully. It just so happened that Mo Jingli was in a terrible fix and the two parted on bad terms. As a result, the rumors became even more turbulent. Prince, Imperial Concubine Dowager invites you in. Mo Jingli stepped into the palace with a gloomy expression. The steward who had been waiting for a long time quickly came forward to report. Mo Jingli nodded. He was originally going to return to his own place, but he turned and walked towards Xian Zhao Grand Concubine's courtyard. Mu Fei. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine supported her forehead as she sat on the soft couch, her expression somewhat ugly. Seeing Mo Jingli come in, she forced out a smile and said, Li is here. Come and sit. Does Mu Fei have any orders? Mo Jingli walked to the seat below the Imperial Concubine and asked. The Imperial Concubine shook her head and said, Mu Fei just wants to ask you how things are going. Seeing that the wedding date is approaching, if something happens again, it will not look good for the emperor. Mo Jingli said in a deep voice, Mu Fei, don't worry. It's just some rumors, nothing will happen. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine frowned and said, originally Mu Fei did not agree to you marrying Yi Ying. But seeing that she is Yi Zhaoyi's younger sister, I endured it. Now things had become so unseemly. Can she still hold up the Li Palace's face in the future? Mo Jingli's cold eyes flashed with a trace of light and said respectfully, she is not sensible. In the future I will have to trouble Mu Fei to teach her well. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine waved her hand and said with some annoyance, forget it. Since things have come to this, I can only do this. Go and tell Yi Ying that these days I will be well behaved and wait for the wedding. Since I want to be the Li Palace's Wang Fei, I need to be praised as a Wang Fei. Especially, don't provoke her third sister. Chapter 41. Imperial Mother? The consort dowager sneered and looked at Mo Jingli helplessly. Leah, you really made a mistake this time. Although Imperial Mother couldn't see through third young Miss Ye's depth, how could that girl really be a barren daughter like others say? Besides, even if she really is a barren daughter, as long as she isn't a fool, she is still more valuable than Yi Ying. I heard that the head of the Su family, Su Hongyu, and several other young masters have arrived in the capital. Now you should know how important Yi Li is to the Su family. Mo Jingli coldly snorted. No matter how old the Su family is, they have already withdrawn from the imperial court. Besides, that Yi Li has no virtue to speak of. She is unfit to be the princess consort of the Li Palace. The consort dowager sighed and nodded. Forget it, as long as you know what you are doing. Mo Jingli didn't know that the recent days were just the beginning of his bad luck. Even if they had already withdrawn from the imperial court, the power of the aristocratic families that had spanned across two dynasties for hundreds of years was not something a mere prince could resist. Ding Kingdom residence, Prince, third young Master Feng is here. Hearing the guard's report, Mo Shuyao put down the brush he was painting and frowned. Let him in. After a while, Feng Jiao appeared at the door of the study, looking like a hedonistic son of rich parents. He said with a grin, the wedding is near and you can still sit still? Mo Shuyao didn't look at him and said indifferently, what are you doing here? It won't be good to let people know that you are in contact with me. Feng Jiao helplessly shrugged. I didn't want to come. Someone wants to see you. The threshold of your Ding Kingdom residence is too high, so they came to find me. Mo Shuyao stopped painting and pondered for a moment before raising his head. Su Qingchen. Prince Ding is well informed. You really live up to your reputation. Someone outside the door laughed. Su Qingchen, dressed in white, gracefully walked in. The study suddenly accommodated three outstanding men with their own characteristics, making it seem a little crowded in an instant. Mo Shuyao looked at Su Qingchen in silence for a moment, then sighed and said, thank you for your hard work, great Mr. Su. Su Qingchen nodded in satisfaction and said, there's no need for that. Even if it wasn't you, if it was someone else, father would still personally come to the capital. You should know that Liu is the only daughter of our Su family. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows and found a place to sit as he looked at Mo Shuyao mockingly. Like he said, the future Ding Wangfei's backing was very big. Su Qingchen clearly had no intention of being courteous. He walked over to an empty chair and sat down. Sizing up Emo Shuyao, he said, "Who would have thought that the #1 young general in the capital would become so cultured and refined?" When Su Qingchen became famous, Emo Shuyao was also at the peak of his fame, so the two of them had some friendship. However, one was a martial artist, the other was a scholar. Their personalities were as different as heaven and earth, so they didn't have a deep friendship. Emo Shuyao lowered his eyes and smiled bitterly. Is Brother Su rubbing salt on someone's wound by mentioning this? Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows and smiled. If Prince can't even accept the current situation, why should the Su family hand Li Er over to you? Furthermore, this one doesn't see that Prince feels hurt. Emo Shuyao raised his eyes carrying a faint indifference. If this one feels hurt, will Brother Su not mention it? Feng Jiao rolled his eyes at the two people in front of him. I say, do the two of you intend to keep talking about this meaningless nonsense? Su Qingchen smiled apologetically. All right, this one has been rude. However, I believe that Prince will forgive the feelings of an elder brother who is about to marry off his sister, right? Emo Shuyao could only smile bitterly. Actually, Shuyao is more curious. Why would the Su family agree to marry Miss Yi into the Ding Wangfu? Su Qingchen glanced at Feng Jiao. Feng Jiao smiled lazily at him. Su Qingchen understood that Feng Jiao was someone Emo Shuyao trusted. Although he didn't know why Emo Shuyao would trust a son of the Feng family who was obviously on the emperor's side, Su Qingchen didn't plan to get to the bottom of it, because the emperor won't give us the chance to freely choose. Li Wang wasn't a good choice in the first place. It just so happens that Li Er also doesn't like him. What's more, the emperor actually agreed to cancel the engagement. Then why didn't he agree? Although the emperor was meddlesome and bestowed a marriage to Li Er, compared to Li Wang, this one and my father still believe in Prince Ding more. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. Li Wang is the #1 candidate for husband in the hearts of the noble ladies in the capital. Su Qingchen didn't care at all. That doesn't change the fact that he's an idiot. Was Li Wang an idiot? Of course not. However, eldest young master Su clearly didn't think so. Therefore Feng Jiao could only throw him a ruthless look. Is the emperor still unable to tolerate the Su family? Tying the Su family and the Ding Wangfu together, then swallowing them in one gulp. Isn't his appetite too big? After a while Emo Shuyao asked faintly. In the study the temperature seemed to instantly become cold. Feng Jiao couldn't help but retract his unrestrained smile, frowning as he looked at Emo Shuyao. Prince has good eyesight. Su Qingchen smiled, his slender fingers lightly tapping the armrest, his actions still boundless elegance. The emperor probably thinks that the Su family and the Ding Wangfu are no longer as powerful as they used to be. If we act separately, it's hard to avoid alerting the enemy. It's better to capture them all in one go. After all, the Su family is estranged from Mount Li, the #1 school in Dechu State. At least half of the officials in the imperial court came from Mount Li. How can you let the emperor who has great talent and bold vision rest assured? For some reason Feng Jiao felt that the words great talent and bold vision coming out of Su Qingchen's mouth were more like sarcasm. Emo Shuyao nodded, saying, the Ding Wangfu's vitality is indeed greatly damaged. No wonder the emperor is so confident. Su Qingchen smiled. This one doesn't think the emperor should have that much confidence. Otherwise all these years, why would the Ding Wangfu still exist? The Ding Wangfu was definitely a thorn in the side of the emperor. Back then, when the Ding Wangfu encountered a huge change, if it wasn't for the man in front of him withstanding his illness to turn the tide, the Ding Wangfu would probably only exist in the memories of the people. Feng Jiao looked at the two equally cultured and refined men in front of him and couldn't help but shiver from the bottom of his heart. To turn the two families that he feared the most into in-laws, the emperor, do you really hate your own vast territory so much? I say, can the two of you discuss something that normal people can accept? He was only a hedonistic son, a hedonistic son. Why did they have to discuss something that could lead to the execution of the entire family in front of him? Su Qingchen nodded in agreement, very considerately changing his words. All right, I feel that there will be some changes in the marriage between Prince and Li. Of course, the Su family, who is already far away from the capital, is powerless to do anything about these matters. So I'll have to trouble Prince. Just take it as Prince's sincerity. Emo Shuyao nodded. Many thanks for Brother Su's reminder. I know what to do. Su Qingshan stood up in satisfaction saying, since that's the case, this one will take his leave. Let's chat again when there's time. Chapter 42. Emo Shuyao nodded. His fingers lightly tapped on the armrest of the wheelchair a few times. A brown-clothed youth appeared at the door. Prince. Send young Master Su out. Su Qingshan's handsome brows raised slightly. He didn't say anything else and followed the youth out. Only the two of them were left in the study. Feng Jiao looked at his good friend with a puzzled expression. Ayao, why do I feel that this Su Qingshan is different from the rumors? Are you, young Master Feng, the same inside and outside? Feng Jiao was speechless. Who in this world did not live with a few masks on their faces? What does Su Qingshan mean? Does that person in the palace really want to wipe out the Su family and the Ding royal estate in one fell swoop? Feng Jiao asked. The Su family is the head of the literati in Dechu state. The Ding royal estate has always held a large number of troops. They are indeed an eyesore to him. But there's no need to pull the two families together, right? Isn't he afraid that you guys will work together to pull him down from the top? Was he too confident, or did the emperor himself have a hidden trump card? Emo Shuyao smiled faintly. The Su family won't rebel. He only needs to implicate the Su family when the Ding royal estate is unlucky. He is very clear in his heart that as long as Sir Qingyun is around, the Su family will definitely not betray the Dechu state. Even if they become in-laws, the Su family won't provide much help to the Ding royal estate. Feng Jiao shrugged his shoulders. He secretly thought that he didn't see that Su Qingshan as a subject who would pledge his loyalty to the emperor. Get someone to keep a close eye on Emo Jingli. Emo Shuyao picked up his brush again to finish the unfinished painting. Feng Jiao lazily fanned himself. Emo Jingli is very busy right now. Who do you think spread those rumors? When he first heard those rumors, Feng Jiao felt that Emo Jingli was so unlucky this year because he didn't burn incense properly. Emo Shuyao did not even raise his head. Su family, Murong family, Duqua family, Lu family, censorate Chuxiang Pavilion, and Feng Jiao was speechless. Fine, he shouldn't have asked. After offending so many people, if Emo Jingli wasn't unlucky, then who would be? At the end of the 4th month, the Yi residence sent someone to bring Yi Li back to the Yi residence. Yi Ying's wedding was set to be held on the last day of April. It was said to be the only auspicious day in April. Su Hongyu calmly dismissed the people sent by the Yi family to pick up Yi Li. He only asked Su Qingbai and Su Qingyan to personally send Yi Li back the day before Yi Ying's wedding. Although Minister Yi was very unhappy, he did not say much due to his inexplicable fear of his brother-in-law. He only asked Yi Li to return to Qing Yixian to rest. When Yi Li went to the Su residence, she only brought 2 maids, Qing Shuang and Qing Xia. When she returned, she brought Mother Lin, Mother Wei and more than a dozen people. There were also 2 maids, Qing Wan and Qing Yu, personally chosen by her grandfather. Qing Yixian, which was not big to begin with, seemed a little crowded. Mother Wei looked at the decorations of Qing Yixian and wiped her tears. How was this a place for a rich young lady? Yi Li did not mind. She only smiled and advised, no matter how gorgeous the decorations are, it will be taken advantage of by others when we leave. Mother Wei still did not agree. She only said that the young lady should not be wronged. Then she ordered the maids to redecorate Yi Li's room. Yi Li had no choice but to go. It seemed that everyone was dissatisfied with her room. Aunt also complained every time she came. Eldest young miss has come. The maid waiting outside the door reported. Yi Li put down the needle and thread in her hand. She raised her head and said with a smile, invite Shitsi Tsifei in. After a while, a beautiful woman dressed in palace clothing stepped into the room. Seeing Yi Li sitting at the table, she couldn't help but smile. 3rd sister. Yi Li quickly rose to greet. Greetings to Shitsi Tsifei. This woman was the eldest young miss of the Yi residence, Nan Marquis Shitsi Tsifei Yizhen. Yizhen pulled her and said with a smile, I don't dare. After 3rd sister's wedding, I still have to give 3rd sister a greeting. There are no outsiders now. Let's call each other sisters. Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, eldest sister, please sit. Yizhen's birth mother was a personal maid who had grown up with Minister Yi. When Yizhen was 5 years old, she died of illness. Yizhen was raised by Su Shi since she was young. When Su Shi passed away, Yizhen was already 13 years old. Because of this, Yili and Yizhen's relationship was not bad. When Yizhen was still at home, she would occasionally not take care of Yili. However, when she was not yet 15 years old, she was engaged by Wang Shi to be Nan Marquis Shitzi Cifei. It was said that Nan Marquis Shitzi did not dote on Yizhen. After 7 or 8 years of marriage, they did not have a son or a daughter. Yizhen also rarely returned to the Yi family. The two sisters had not seen each other for nearly 2 years. This time they came back to add to Yi Ying's dowry. Yizhen lightly touched the red brocade on the table. Her heart skipped a beat. This is Phoenix brocade? Third sister is making a wedding dress? Yili nodded. She was not too picky about wedding dresses. Therefore she was not in a hurry to make one. Otherwise she didn't know what to do with the Phoenix brocade that eldest uncle had specially brought over. After all, Dechu State's custom was that each woman could only have one wedding dress. It was very inauspicious to have another. Yizhen touched the soft red brocade in her hand with slight envy. She looked at Yili and said, "This wasn't prepared by Furen, right? I saw that fourth sister only used Mandarin duck brocade. I heard that it was bestowed by the Empress Dowager." Yili frowned slightly. She looked at the wedding dress in front of her with some hesitation. The Empress Dowager had bestowed Mandarin duck brocade to Yi Ying. If she used the more precious Phoenix brocade, the Empress Dowager's face would not look good. Yizhen had been the Shitzi Cifei for many years. He was not an ignorant person. She thought for a moment and said, "Phoenix brocade is a fabric used by the Dongling Kingdom's imperial family. Not only are the commoners unable to weave it, but it is also strictly forbidden to sell it. Originally, Dongling and Nanzhao would send some as gifts to our Dechu State's imperial family every year. However, it is said that when the late emperor was alive, the Dongling Kingdom's manufacturing process was accidentally lost. Third sister, this Phoenix brocade should be one of the 2 bolts that the late emperor bestowed to the Su family when mother was born, right? Eldest sister has good eyesight. This was indeed sent to the capital by grandfather's eldest uncle." Yili nodded and said, "A wedding dress made of Phoenix brocade was once the dream of all the noble young ladies in the capital. It was different from the gorgeous and dazzling Mandarin duck brocade. The Phoenix brocade did not look conspicuous and was more like a bolt of red ordinary satin. However, when it was exposed to light, a lifelike phoenix design would appear. If one were to walk around while wearing it, it would give others the illusion of a phoenix fluttering in the air with one's movements. Generally, the best way to make it was to embroider a hibiscus or peony pattern on the Phoenix brocade. When it was motionless, it would be a wedding dress with hibiscus flowers blooming and peony blooming. Once it was exposed to sunlight or light, the exquisite phoenix piercing the peony was enough to make anyone gasp in amazement. Yili had already made the veil on her head. She had already discovered to her surprise that under sunlight and light, even the intensity of the light would change the phoenix's color and shape. The craftsmanship of this world truly made Yili, who could be said to be experienced and knowledgeable, very surprised. Moreover, unlike the Mandarin duck brocade, which was rare but could still be found, the Phoenix brocade was not only found in the Dechu state. It was likely that there were only a few bolts of Phoenix brocade in every country. It could even be said that it was the loss of Phoenix brocade that created the current reputation of Mandarin duck brocade in Nanzhao. Chapter 43. Since it was bestowed by the late emperor, it just so happens that the current emperor bestowed the marriage. Third sister wearing this dress can be said to bring out the best in each other. When the time comes, it will definitely amaze everyone in the capital." Yizhen said with a smile. A trace of joy quickly flashed through her eyes. She could imagine what kind of expression Wang Shi and Yi Ying would have when Yili wore such a dress to get married. Yili nodded and handed the unfinished wedding dress to Qing Wan, who was serving beside her. She smiled at Yizhen and said, "You are busy talking about me. I haven't seen you for a long time. How is eldest sister?" Yizhen narrowed her eyes and the smile on her face faded a little. She said, "What's wrong with me? Isn't it just living like this?" Yili had heard of the reputation of Marquis Nan's heir. Unfortunately, these things were not something she could control. Moreover, her relationship with Yizhen was not close enough for her to ask about her private matters. She could only say, "No matter what, you are the most important. If you don't care about yourself, who can care about you?" Yizhen was startled. She looked at Yili and said, third sister is right. These years, third sister has not had it easy. In the future, with the Su family around, third sister will not be more sad than at home. Yili smiled faintly. She stood up and said, has eldest sister gone to see fourth sister? Yijin shook her head and said, I just went to greet grandmother. Fourth sister is busy choosing the new head ornaments. I did not want to disturb her. Yili smiled and said, then let's go together. Qing Xia, take out the set of Phoenix Sunrise head ornaments and send it to fourth sister. Qing Shuang said, young miss, isn't that the old madam's gift to you? And it was the most precious one. Fourth sister wanted it before, but the old madam did not give it to her. It would be a waste to give it to her now. Yili waved her hand and said, I can't use that. Fourth sister likes it, then give it to her. Yili could only stay away from that set of graceful and precious ornaments. She had no doubt that if she really wore the whole set, her neck would hurt. In fact, Ying would not really wear it. After all, she had always maintained a delicate and refined image. She was just angry that old Madame Yi gave it to her and not her. Yijin carefully looked at the indifferent smile on Yi Li's face and sighed softly. Among us sisters, third sister's temperament is still the best. Yi Li smiled and said, it's not that I have a good temperament. In any case, we don't need to spend our entire lives together. Even if we can't, we only have a month left. It's so boring to fight over such trivial matters. Yijin lowered her head and smiled. Fourth sister is right. When Yi Li and Yijin arrived at Yi Ying's courtyard, Yi Ying and Wang Shi were choosing a dazzling array of ornaments on the table. Yi Ying was a little surprised to see the two of them walking in hand, but she quickly covered it up and got up to greet them with a smile. Big sister, third sister, why are you here together? Yijin smiled and said, I heard that fourth sister was busy, so I went to third sister's place first. It just so happens that third sister is coming over, so let's go together. Yi Ying smiled faintly and said, Big sister, what are you talking about? What can Ying be busy with? Big sister, third sister, please take a seat. Yi Li followed behind the two of them and raised her eyebrows with interest. This was the first time she saw Yi Ying talking to her sisters without any arrogance. Especially when they were sisters born from concubines that she had always looked down on. It seemed that the old madam's methods were not to be underestimated. She could actually change Yi Ying so much in such a short time. Facing Yi Ying's warm and affectionate greeting, Yijin was also a little uncomfortable. She looked at Yi Ying a few times before letting her pull her in and greeting Wang Shi. Greetings, mother. Madam. Yi Li bowed lightly. Wang Shi looked at Yi Li's indifferent and calm appearance and secretly gritted her teeth. Although she had been promoted as the legal wife for many years, Yi Li had never opened her mouth to teach her mother. Although she did not want Su's daughter to call her mother, Yi Li was the only legitimate daughter in the Yi residence. This kind of feeling always made Wang Shi feel that her title as the mistress of the household was not legitimate. She had once whispered pillow talk to the old master, but she did not know why. No matter how hard she tried, the old master had never insisted on this matter. He also never had the intention to force Yi Li to change the way she addressed her. Mother, Inger wants to talk to big sister and third sister. If you have something to do, you can go ahead. Yi Ying pulled Wang Shi's hand and acted coquettishly. Wang Shi looked at her beautiful daughter dotingly and proudly, and her mood immediately improved. No matter what, she still won in the end, didn't she? Her daughter was a concubine in the palace, and the other was Prince Li's legal wife. Her son would be the master of the Yi family in the future. However, Lady Su had died early. Her biological daughter could only marry a crippled prince, and her adopted daughter could only be a concubine. Alright, you two sisters should have a good chat. There are still some things to take care of. Mother will go out first. The three sisters stood up and sent Wang Shi out. Yi Ying immediately pulled Yijin and Yi Li to sit down. She looked at them apologetically and said, Big sister, third sister, Ying was not sensible in the past and neglected both of you. I hope that big sister will be magnanimous and not blame Ying. Hearing this, Yijin looked at Yi Li doubtfully. She smiled and said, Fourth sister, you must be joking. We are sisters, so what's there to blame? Big sister still needs to rely on you in the future. Yi Ying smiled and said, Grandmother is right. We are sisters, so naturally we need to help each other. Big sister, don't say that you need to rely on us. Yi Li sat at the side and listened to the two chatting. She had a rough idea of what old Madame Yi and Yi Ying were talking about. but she was still surprised that Yi Ying would listen to old Madame Ye's teachings. Of course, she believed in another saying, a leopard cannot change its spots. Even if Yi Ying really listened to old Madame Ye's teachings, it was impossible for her personality to change in such a short time. It seemed that something had happened these days that she was not aware of. Late at night, the minister's manor, which should have been quiet, was still brightly lit for tomorrow's wedding. Even the maidservants in Yi Li's Qingyi pavilion were excited. After all, the marriage of the fourth miss of the Qingyi pavilion to the Li palace was a joyous occasion. Everyone in the Qingyi pavilion would be rewarded handsomely. Yi Li dismissed the servants beside her. As usual, she picked up the book that she had not finished reading and sat under the lamp to read. From time to time she would pick up the pen and write. After an unknown amount of time, the noise that came from afar seemed to gradually fade away. Yi Li raised her hand and rubbed her eyebrows tiredly. Her body, which was leaning against the chair, slowly leaned to one side. Her calm eyes were tinged with sleepiness. Yi Li blinked her eyes. Finally, she could not resist the sleepiness and slowly closed her eyes. The cold room was silent. Only the occasional crackling of the lamp could be heard. After a long time, a black shadow flashed out of Qingyi pavilion. It seemed that the person was very familiar with the layout of the manor. He easily avoided the guards in the manor, jumped over the wall of the backyard and disappeared into the dark night. In Qingyi pavilion, there was no trace of the owner in the cold and elegant boudoir. Only an open book was left on the ground beside the desk. Chapter 44. In the outskirts of the capital. In the dark forest, a tall black figure was carrying a long object as he moved through the forest. He only stopped when he saw the tall figure standing not too far away. "You're late," the man in the shadows said in a deep voice. "No, you're the one who's early." The black-clothed man laughed, his voice sounding a bit lazy. He looked mockingly at the man whose face he couldn't see clearly. "I heard that the Yi family's fourth miss is the #1 beauty in the capital. I didn't think that you wouldn't be interested in the #1 beauty and would spend money to steal the third miss who has no talent and no looks. Or is this third miss the true beauty? I was in a hurry before and didn't get a good look. Now that I've seen it, it's not bad." As he said this, he put down the person on his shoulder and brushed away the hair on the sleeping girl's face. "Enough. You can leave." The man's voice sounded a bit angry as he coldly said. The black-clothed man shrugged and smiled. "Since it's like this, I wish you good luck." After he said this, he didn't delay and simply put the girl on the ground. He shrugged his shoulders and disappeared into the forest. The man in the shadows looked at the girl on the ground for a while before walking out of the shadows. Under the dim light of the night, a cold face vaguely appeared, staring fiercely at the girl on the ground. His originally handsome face was somewhat sinister under the dim light of the night. "Yi Li, don't blame me for being ruthless. If you want to blame someone, blame your bad luck. Even if it's something that I don't want, it's not Mo Xiaoyao's turn to pick it up." He bent down and reached out to grab the girl's collar. But the moment he touched her, he felt his vision go black and then a pain in his neck, causing him to fall down. The originally unconscious girl opened her eyes and pushed the person who looked like her backwards. As for the sound of something hitting the ground, she naturally ignored it. Yi Li slowly tidied up her clothes before looking at the man on the ground. Her expression was a bit disappointed. When she noticed that there was something wrong with the incense in the room, she thought that someone was trying to harm her. It turned out that it was Mo Jingli, and the reason was so stupid. Circling around Mo Jingli, Yi Li wondered for the first time if this Prince Li's brain had been spoiled by his brother, the Emperor. After thinking for a while, she decided not to waste any more effort. He leisurely took out a ball of inconspicuous silk thread from his sleeve and neatly tied up the person on the ground. Looking at the man who was tied up by her, Yi Li nodded with satisfaction. Don't be fooled by the fact that this ball of silk thread looked unremarkable. Regardless of whether it was in terms of hardness or toughness, it was very good. Unless Mo Jingli had the legendary profound internal energy, it would be impossible for a normal person to do this. As for her tying technique, Yi Li was even more assured. Unless Mo Jingli had the ability to shrink his bones, he could only wait for someone to save him. She just didn't know if Mo Jingli had brought any bodyguards with him to do this kind of sneaky thing. However, based on the current situation, it seemed that he didn't. Hopefully he could make it in time for tomorrow's wedding. Yili irresponsibly thought. In the end she still kicked the unconscious person to vent her anger. Then she followed the path she remembered and walked towards the edge of the forest. Ayao, what did I just see? After a long time, a stuttering voice sounded from the dark forest. 3 figures walked out from the forest. Feng Jiao's image of an elegant young master was once again shattered. He stared dumbfoundedly at the unconscious man on the ground. Mo Xiuyao looked at everything in front of him calmly and said, "It's just like what you just saw. This young master didn't sleep and ran out with you in the middle of the night because I was afraid something would happen to third Miss Yi. Now it seems that the one who would be in trouble is someone else, right?" If it wasn't for the fact that he still remembered his image, Feng Jiao would have screamed like a woman. Look at what he just saw. After receiving the news that someone wanted to harm Yili, he crawled out of the beauty's bed in the middle of the night and hurried over. In the end he saw Yili put Mo Jingli in a way that even he couldn't see clearly. Mo Jingli was a bit stupid, but he was still considered one of the top young talents in the capital, right? Walking to Mo Xiuyao's side, he copied Yili's actions and circled around him. Feng Jiao propped up his chin in boredom and asked, "What should we do now?" "Throw him into the pool over there," Mo Xiuyao said without a frown. "That's a cold pool, he will die." Feng Jiao advised without any sincerity. "Take off his clothes as well," Mo Xiuyao said calmly. "I'm afraid that won't work. Your future princess is very skilled at tying people up." Feng Jiao squatted on the ground and studied the knots on Mo Jingli's body. "Yao, don't make third Miss Yi angry in the future. Women are too scary." After thinking for a long time, Feng Jiao still couldn't think of how he would be able to escape without help if this kind of rope was tied on his body. However, this method is worth learning. "A Jing, his prince." The youth standing behind Mo Xiuyao and pushing the wheelchair responded. He went forward to grab the person on the ground and walked into the depths of the forest. After a while there was a splash. Clearly someone had been thrown into the water. Feng Jiao couldn't help but stomp his feet. "Yao, you'll teach the child the wrong things. What if Mo Jingli drowns?" A prince dying in the capital and also the emperor's younger brother was not a small matter. Mo Xiuyao calmly looked at his hand on the armrest and said calmly, "A Jin has always known propriety." Propriety? Did a Jin have such a thing as propriety in his head? Feng Jiao stomped his feet and ran over to see. He was speechless. Mo Jingli had been thrown into the pool. The area above his chest was still above the water. Most importantly, the rope that tied him up was obviously a lot longer, and the end of the rope was tied to a tree at the edge of the pool. This could ensure that Mo Jingli would not be accidentally brought to the center of the pool. He really knew propriety. "I'll send your prince back. You stay here and watch. If it's too early, it'll wake up the person he brought. Don't drown him to death." Ajin frowned. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Feng Jiao looked at Mo Jingli sympathetically, then waved his fan in satisfaction as he walked in the direction of Mo Xiuyao. "Yao, I'm almost curious about your future princess." Feng Jiao walked back into the forest. Mo Xiuyao was still sitting in the shade of the trees. In the dark night he didn't look very happy. No one knew what he was thinking. Mo Xiuyao raised his head and said calmly, "It's time to go back." Feng Jiao looked curiously at Mo Xiuyao. "You're letting him go so easily?" Mo Xiuyao had cultivated his character over the years and seemed to have a good temper. But Feng Jiao knew very well that Mo Xiuyao had never been a kind person. Mo Xiuyao's gentle eyes flashed with coldness. "Tomorrow is Jingli's wedding. If something happens to the groom, it'll be too disappointing." Feng Jiao wanted to sigh. "I thought you didn't want Mo Jingli to have anything to do with the Yi family. Don't forget, if he marries Yi Ying, you and he will be brother-in-law. Wasn't that an unpleasant relationship?" Mo Xiuyao snorted. He exerted force and the wheelchair turned and headed out of the forest. Feng Jiao raised his brows, shrugged and followed. He didn't know what interesting things would happen at the wedding tomorrow. It was best to get a good seat to watch the show. Chapter 45. What about the guy who kidnapped third Miss Yi? Catch him and give him an arm and a leg as a wedding gift to Mo Jingli. Although the city gate had long been closed, Yili still returned to the minister's mansion before dawn with some effort. As soon as she entered her room, Qing Shuang and Qing Yu greeted her. The unconcealable anxiety on their faces also turned into relief. Qing Yu calmly served Yi Li a cup of tea. It was as if the usually elegant and dignified Yi Li was not bothered by the fact that she was able to jump in through the window in front of her. Qing Shuang patted her chest and exhaled, "Miss, you're finally back." Qing Shuang was worried to death. Yi Li smiled and said, "What's there to worry about when someone is following me? Right, Qing Wan?" A figure fell lightly outside the window. It was Qing Wan, who came from the Su family with Qing Yu. Qing Wan pursed her lips and smiled, "Miss, you're so powerful. Qing Wan followed you all the way and no one noticed. Who knew that I couldn't hide from you?" Yi Li smiled and said, "In fact, I didn't notice you, but I seemed to smell a faint, special and familiar fragrance along the way. The person who caught me, the fragrance on his body was not light, so he didn't smell it." Qing Wan lowered her head in frustration and secretly decided that she would never use any incense in the future. In fact, the incense she used was very light. Ordinary people would not notice it at all. But Yi Li's senses were indeed much more sensitive than ordinary people. "Did anything interesting happen in the woods after I left?" Yi Li sat down and asked while drinking the freshly brewed tea. Qing Wan also learned from Yi Li's action and came in through the window. She smiled and said, "That person was thrown into a pool in the depths of the woods. Prince Ding." "Mrs. Wise." Qing Wan smiled in a good mood. Thinking of the embarrassing appearance of someone who was tied to a tree and thrown into the pool, Qing Wan felt that tonight's worry was not in vain. She believed that eldest young master would also like this news very much. This servant also saw someone beside Prince Ding. They seemed to have a very good relationship. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at Qing Wan. Qing Wan did not keep her in suspense and said, "It's the famous young master Feng San in the capital." Yi Li hadn't thought about the relationship between Feng Zhiyao and Mo Xiuyao. This also explained why Feng Zhiyao had been so curious about her during the 100-Flower Festival. So His Highness Prince Ding also went to save Miss? Young Miss didn't see Prince Ding? Qing Shuang blinked her eyes and asked curiously. Yi Li shook her head. She knew that there were other people in the forest at that time. She could vaguely guess who it was, but she had no intention of meeting them, so she ignored them. Since Mo Xiuyao did not order anyone to stop Qing Wan, he must have understood her intentions. There was no need to waste words when interacting with smart people. "Very good." She casually threw a jade pendant to Qing Wan and said, "Give it to eldest cousin. Ask him to see if he can find out who the owner of this jade pendant is." Qing Wan caught it in her hand and said with a gloating smile, "Then this servant has to be quick." Prince Ding reserved one of his hands and one of his legs for Li Wang as a congratulatory gift. If he didn't run fast, I'm afraid he would be in trouble tonight. His Qinggong is not bad. If there is time, find a way to keep him. Maybe he can help us with something. If it was too late, then there was no other way. She did not think that a person who would enter the Fu in the middle of the night to kidnap an innocent woman would be a kind person. However, that person clearly knew that she was awake, but still took her to Mo Jingli. Moreover, he did not have any intention of reminding Mo Jingli. It could be seen that he was a very interesting person. Of course, it was more likely that Mo Jingli had unintentionally offended this person. Qing Yu stood at the side and looked at this and that. She asked with a strange expression, "Can tomorrow's wedding still be held as scheduled?" Qing Wan waved her hand indifferently and said, "It should be fine. I heard Feng Zhiyao instructing Prince Ding's guards to send Prince Li's men to rescue his master when the sun is about to rise." Qing Yu nodded her head and said, "Since that's the case, young Miss should quickly rest while it's still early. If you don't look well tomorrow, people will criticize you." Qing Shuang also nodded in agreement. She did not want others to take the opportunity to ruin Mrs. reputation. Did no one consider that a wedding was also very tiring? If the groom fainted or something during the wedding tomorrow? Yi Li thought irresponsibly and let a few maids change her clothes and push her to bed to sleep. Shangshu Fu early in the morning there were people coming and going. Yi Li brought Yi Shan and Yi Lin to sit in old Madame Ye's Ronghua Hall to accompany her. The courtyard where Yi Ying lived was already busy before dawn. Wang Shi disliked Yi Lin and Yi Shan for being a hindrance and was even more afraid that Yi Li would take the opportunity to do something. She did not want them to accompany her. Instead, she brought two nieces from her maternal family to accompany Yi Ying. Yi Li was naturally happy and relaxed. She came to greet old Madam early in the morning and stayed here to accompany old Madam. Anyway, she could not stay in Qing Yishan for the whole day. That would only be gossiped about. Old Madame Ye's face was full of joy. Even her face was much more amiable when facing everyone. Yi Lin and Yi Shan naturally would not let go of this opportunity. They joked and flattered in front of old Madame Yi. Yi Li drank tea calmly while silently wondering if she should join in the fun and watch a play in the next few days. When it was close to noon, old Madame Ye's white eyebrows gradually frowned. She ordered the people around her, "Go out and see if the wedding party has arrived." After a while the people who were sent out hurriedly came back. They wiped their sweat and reported, "Old Madam, the wedding party has not arrived yet." Old Madame Ye's smiling face suddenly darkened. It was almost noon. It was inauspicious to come in the afternoon to escort the bride. Is Prince Li really going to abandon fourth sister again? The youngest Yi Shan suddenly asked. Shankar. Yi Shan's birth mother was so scared that her face turned pale. How dare you? Today is fourth sister's big day. What nonsense are you talking about? Go out. Yi Li said sternly. She glanced at Yi Shan before old Madame Yi got angry. Yi Shan moved her lips and wanted to say something. Yi Lin quickly pulled her and her birth mother and dragged Yi Shan out. Shan is young and speaks without thinking. It's Li Er's fault for not teaching her properly. Grandmother, please don't be angry. Yi Li looked at old Madame Yi and said softly. Third miss is right. Sixth miss is a little girl. It's inevitable that she has some thoughts. Fortunately everyone here is our family. Old Madam, please don't be angry because today is fourth Miss's big day. Because Yi Shan was pregnant, concubine Zhao was given a seat as an exception. At this time she quickly stood up and pleaded with old Madame Yi. Old Madame Yi was not in the mood to argue with Yi Shan. She waved her hand and said, "Go and ask master to come here. Also send someone to check." Knowing that old Madame Yi was not in a good mood, the servant did not dare to say anything and hurriedly left. Chapter 46. The atmosphere in Ronglu Hall was a bit heavy. Yi Li was still sitting quietly and drinking tea. Concubine Zhao was sitting sideways and peeking at Yi Li from time to time. But she found that there was no emotion on this young lady's face. It was as if nothing had happened. For a moment, concubine Zhao was not sure if today's matter had anything to do with the third young lady. Seemingly aware of concubine Zhao's gaze, Yi Li raised her head and glanced at her. The completely unreadable gaze made concubine Zhao's heart go cold. She nodded slightly to Yi Li, then leaned her head against the back of the chair and closed her eyes to rest. Seeing that noon had passed, the messenger who had been waiting outside the gate had not returned. It seemed that Prince Li's wedding was destined to be late. Minister Yi came in with Wang Shi in a hurry. Old Madame Yi stared at her son and daughter-in-law and said sternly, "What happened? Did you find out?" Minister Ye's face was also clouded. He said in a deep voice, "Mother, calm down. The people who were sent to find out have returned. Prince Li's mansion has already set off." Already set off? Old Madame Yi was so angry that she laughed. She said a few good words and pointed at Minister Yi. Which family's daughter is getting married and the husband's family can forget the auspicious time of the wedding? After a few days, our Yi family will be the joke of the whole capital. What does Prince Li's mansion mean? The daughter-in-law has not married into the family and they are already slapping our Yi family's face? Minister Yi frowned and said, "Perhaps there really is something that delayed them?" Old Madame Yi snorted and said, "What is more important than the wedding?" Minister Yi was suddenly speechless. Old Madame Yi could only sigh. Today it was already a joke that Prince Li's mansion was late. But no matter how angry they were, they still had to send Ying out. Otherwise Yi Ying's reputation would really be ruined. She glared at Wang Shi angrily and said, "What are you waiting for? See if Ying is ready. When the wedding's people come, send Ying out immediately." Wang Shi did not care about her grievances and anger at this time. She quickly said, "It has already been ready. We are just waiting to say goodbye. Old Madam can go out." Old Madame Yi snorted and did not speak. When the servants finally came to report that the wedding's procession was about to arrive, it was already the end of the night. Yi Ying was supported by her maidservants and nannies to Rongla Hall to bid farewell to old Madame Yi. Although her face was painted with exquisite makeup, Yi Li, who was sitting close to her, could see that her face was a little pale and her eyes were a little red and swollen. It was obvious that Yi Ying had cried before. 2. Yi Mo Jingli was wearing a red four-clawed golden dragon wedding robe. His already handsome face was even more majestic and dignified. However, Yili could clearly see the stiffness in his indifferent expression that was different from usual. Then she looked at the unnatural pale face and the shadows in his eyes. Yili was forced to sit in silence for the whole morning. Her mood miraculously improved a lot. She dared to bet with her cousin's title of Shuangyuan that Mo Jingli's face was definitely made up. Mo Jingli almost saw Yili, who was wearing a lavender dress, beside Minister Yi at first sight. A fire flashed in his eyes. His eyes were so enthusiastic that he even ignored his bride. Minister Yi coughed a little unhappily. Mo Jingli reluctantly moved his eyes and saluted Minister Yi. "I came late. Please forgive me, father-in-law." If he didn't mention it, it would be fine. But when he mentioned it, Minister Yi was full of anger. His tone was a little light. "I don't dare. I only hope that Prince will treat Ying well in the future." Mo Jingli knew that he was in the wrong. He hurriedly said yes and promised to treat Ying well. When he looked up, he happened to see Yi Li's face with a faint smile. Thinking of his experience last night, Mo Jingli couldn't wait to rush over and tear Yi Li apart. From childhood to adulthood, he was the one who tortured others. Except for the former Mo Shuyao, this was the first time he was tortured so badly. Before dawn, he woke up from his sleep and found that he was tied up and left in the pool. But no matter how he screamed, the guards he brought to the forest came to find him after dawn. Although it was close to May, the pool was cold all year round. When he was pulled out, he was frozen and couldn't move. It was not easy to get to the courtyard outside the city. He drank ginger soup and medicine to drive the cold. After he recovered, he hurried back to the city. He endured the discomfort all over his body to pick up the bride, but he still missed the auspicious hour. Compared with himself, Yi Li, who was looking at him with a calm smile at this time, was so good that it made him gnash his teeth. "I will never let you go." Mo Jingli's eyes were gloomy and cruel. Yi Li faintly curled her lips. She had no hope for Mo Jingli's IQ. She simply gave him a look back. "I'll be waiting for you." Yi Li didn't know that the brief exchange of glances between her and Mo Jingli at this time became completely different in the eyes of people with ulterior motives. Wang Shi, who was standing beside Yi Ying, saw the interaction between the two in her eyes. A trace of ruthlessness flashed through her half-closed eyes. After sending Yi Ying out, what should be done on the surface had been done. Yi Li ignored the complicated and unpredictable eyes of the people and went back to Qing Yixian in a good mood. As soon as she stepped into the study, Yi Li paused for a moment. Then she turned back and ordered, "Qing Wan, stay here to serve. Everyone else go to rest." Although Qing Shuang and others were a little puzzled, they also knew that Yi Li had never liked to follow others. They just thought that she had something to tell Qing Wan alone, so they bowed and left. Qing Wan stood quietly by the door and waited for Mrs. Order. Yi Li walked to the window and stood still. She looked around the study and finally fell on the gauze curtain that separated the inside and outside of the study. She asked softly, "Still not coming out?" There was no movement in the study. Qing Wan already had 2 cold short thorns in her hands. Her usually docile and harmless eyes also had a trace of fierce murderous intent. After waiting for a moment, there was still no movement. Yi Li frowned with some displeasure. She threw something the size of a pigeon egg in her hand in the direction of the gauze curtain. A strong white smoke rose. For a moment, a figure in the white smoke rushed towards Yi Li's direction. But when he was about to reach the window, he suddenly fell to the ground. The cold short thorns on his back had been pressed against his back. But there was no figure of Yi Li in front of him. He didn't know when Yi Li had stood a few feet away from him. "I really didn't expect third Miss Yi to be so skillful. I admit defeat." The man smiled bitterly. He helplessly relaxed his soft body and fell to the ground. Yi Li looked as usual. "I'm still far worse than you. It's just that after last night's adventure, I think it's necessary to make some preparations." The man raised his eyebrows. It seemed that he didn't care that someone was still pressing against his back. He looked at Yi Li with a smile and said, "You know it was me last night? Is it, because of what happened last night, that you can't forget me?" Even Yi Li had to admit that the man in front of her was very handsome. Unlike Feng Zhiyao's unruly appearance, there was more evil and deliberate ambiguity between his eyebrows. If it was an ordinary woman, she would inevitably be angry or blushed with shame and cover her face. Unfortunately, Yi Li was not in this ordinary category. "I thought what you should pay attention to now is not me, but the thing behind you." Believe me, as long as I put 30% more strength in that place, although your life will not be in danger, I guarantee that you can spend the rest of your life lying in bed. As if to confirm Yi Li's words, the sharp short thorns on his back were pushed forward. The sharp pain suddenly spread from his back to his whole body. The man's face changed slightly. He forced a smile and said, "Third Miss Yi is not going to kill me, right?" Chapter 47. Yi Li shook her head and a rare bright smile appeared on her beautiful face. But the man on the ground couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. Killing people to silence them is not something a lady of a noble family should do. So I plan to give you away. I heard that many people are looking for you. Tell me, should I give you to Prince Ding or to Prince Li? The man looked at Yi Li with a bitter face and begged for mercy. If he fell into Prince Ding's hands, he would definitely lose an arm or a leg. If he fell into Prince Li's hands, Prince Li would definitely want his life just because a certain someone was standing here and threatening him. Third Miss, I'm only doing this because I'm paid. Moreover, I've helped you before. Can't you be magnanimous and spare my life? Yi Li turned around and found a comfortable chair to sit in. She smiled and asked, "Are you helping me? Isn't it because Mo Jingli offended you and you want to teach him a lesson?" Unable to beg for mercy, the man could only put away the smile on his face and said seriously, "How about I owe Third Miss a favor?" Yi Li supported her chin and smiled lazily. "Even if you dare to owe young Master Feng Yu a favor from the Wind and Moon brothel, I dare not ask you to return it." The Wind and Moon brothel was the world's #1 brothel. Young Master Feng Yu Han Mingyue was the world's famous flower thief. Being associated with him was equivalent to having one's reputation destroyed. This time the man's expression changed completely. He stared at Yi Li and said, "My jade pendant is in your hands?" In this world, only a handful of people knew that young Master Feng Yu and the owner of the Wind and Moon brothel were the same person. "I didn't know that Third Miss Yi of the minister's estate, the future princess consort of Ding, had such tricks up her sleeves." To be able to secretly take the jade pendant from him was not an easy thing to do. Han Mingyue even suspected that he didn't have a good time coming to the capital this time. Originally, he had only caught a little girl for Prince Li to play with on a whim. He didn't expect that this seemingly harmless lady was a poisonous flower. He had originally wanted to toy with the arrogant Prince Li, but in the end he had gotten himself involved as well. Less than an hour after leaving the forest that day, he discovered that he was being followed. 2 hours later, the original group of people had split into 2 groups. By daybreak, even Mo Jingli's men had joined in. Yi Li smiled but didn't say anything. She patiently looked at the handsome man in front of her. Finally, Han Mingyue raised her hand helplessly and admitted defeat. She said, "Third young Mistress Yi, what do I have to do for you to let me go? If necessary, lend me the intelligence network of the Wind and Moon Pavilion." Yi Li proposed her condition. Han Mingyue's eyes flashed. "This one does not understand what Miss Yi means. Brothels and taverns are the biggest gathering and distribution centers for information. I guess the Tianyi Pavilion has a close relationship with you. Is that right?" The Tianyi Pavilion was the most mysterious intelligence organization in Dechu State. They made a living by selling information. However, because they were secretive, many people who wanted to find them returned empty-handed. "Young Master Han, you can get up. If I'm not wrong, the effects of the drug have already worn off." Yi Li looked at the person who was still lying on the ground powerlessly and reminded him indifferently. Han Mingyue didn't feel embarrassed at being exposed. She stood up calmly and patted the non-existent dust off her body. She cupped her hands and said to Yi Li, "Third young Mistress Yi is so sharp that this one is amazed." It was indeed surprising that a lady of the boudoir could deduce the relationship between the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Tianyi Pavilion. "I'll give the jade pendant to Third young Mistress. If Third young Mistress needs anything, just send someone to find me with the jade pendant. I believe that with Third young Mistress's ability, you should know where to find people." Yi Li didn't refuse. She nodded and said, "Thank you very much. I'll ask Prince Ding to exchange a gift for His Highness Prince Li." Han Mingyue smiled bitterly and looked at Yi Li. "Aren't you afraid that I'll go back on my word?" Yi Li smiled sweetly. "Unless you want the whole world to know the relationship between young Master Feng Yu, the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Tianyi Pavilion, I won't see you out. Goodbye." Qing Luan put away her short thorns and watched Han Mingyue leave through the window. She frowned and asked in confusion, "Young mistress, are you letting him go just like that?" Yili stood up and stood by the window. She stared at the place where Han Mingyue's figure disappeared. "Do you really think he's the owner of the Wind and Moon Pavilion? Isn't he?" Yili played with the jade pendant in her hand. "I don't think so. However, he must have a close relationship with the real Han Mingyue. It's not worth angering Han Mingyue for him. Third young mistress, he is wise." A teasing voice with a lazy smile came from outside. Yili raised her head and looked at Feng Jiao, who was leaning under the eaves. She smiled and said, "Young Master Feng, it's not the behavior of a gentleman to come uninvited." Feng Jiao waved his folding fan naturally and gracefully. It was as if he wasn't standing outside a lady's boudoir, but at a grand event where thousands of people were watching. Third young mistress's methods and knowledge really make me concede defeat. It's not easy to take advantage of Han Mingyue. Yili smiled faintly and said, "I never take advantage of others. I believe that Pavilion Master Han will think so too. However, young Master Feng used Qinggong, which allows him to enter and leave the minister's residence as if no one was there, is almost comparable to young Master Feng Yu." The veins on Feng Jiao's forehead couldn't help but twitch. He tried his best to show his elegance. "His Highness Prince Ding invites third young Mistress Yi to attend Prince Li's wedding." Yili raised her brows. "Prince Ding will attend such an event?" She remembered that ever since Mo Xiuyao's accident he had never appeared in public. Feng Jiao smiled and said, "That was then and this is now. Originally there was no such plan. Apparently it was only decided this morning. I believe that third young mistress will not be disappointed." Yili blinked and immediately understood the meaning behind Feng Jiao's words. She nodded and smiled. "Thank you, young Master Feng Yu, for sending the message. Feng Yu will be waiting for you at that time." Yili, who wasn't part of the wedding procession, originally didn't need to attend her younger sister's wedding. But since Mo Xiuyao had sent Feng Yu to send the message, Yili believed that there would be a good show to watch. And she felt that there was a need to personally communicate with her fiancé about Han Mingyue. Good communication was good for mutual trust. After changing into a suitable set of clothes, Yili sent someone to report to Old Furen. Before she left the door, a servant came in to report that Prince Ding had come to pick up third young mistress. Old Furen knew that it wasn't convenient for Mo Xiuyao and didn't dare delay. She hurriedly let Yili go. Coming out of the gates of the Yi Fu, she saw the carriage with the symbol of the Ding King's Fu. The young guard called Ajin saw Yili come out and immediately came forward. "Ajin greets Wang Fei." Yili was a bit embarrassed. Even though this was only the second time they had met, but Yili could see that this youth called Ajin wasn't very clever. Nodding and saying thank you, Yili got off the carriage. Mo Xiuyao was leaning against the carriage, his head lowered as he read a book in his hand. Seeing Yili come up, he put the book to one side and said with a faint smile, "Sit, were you frightened last night?" Yili walked in front of him and sat down. She smiled and replied, "I was fine, I had to trouble you to go over." Mo Xiuyao seemed to have thought of something interesting and the faint smile in his eyes became more real. "It was fortunate that I went over. Otherwise I wouldn't have known that Wang Fei had such methods." Yili shrugged her shoulders indifferently. She didn't mind Mo Xiuyao seeing some of her true colors. After all, they would be husband and wife in the future and there were many things that couldn't be hidden from him. "It's just a small trick, I've embarrassed myself in front of your highness." Chapter 48. Mo Xiuyao frowned slightly. "Do we have to keep calling him Prince and Princess Consort?" Yili looked up at him in confusion. "Then what should we call him?" "Lord, husband, husband, husband." Before she could finish, Yili shivered. She didn't feel that there was anything wrong with other people calling him, but why did it sound so awkward when it came out of her mouth? Compared to these names, Yili would rather follow the crowd and call him Prince and Princess Consort. Mo Xiuyao smiled. "You can call me by my name." Mo Xiuyao. Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao corrected. "Can I call you Li Li?" Yili nodded. She was glad that he didn't call her Li. To be honest, other than the elders, it was hard for her to get used to being called that intimately. "Do you mind if I release that person from yesterday?" Yili looked at Mo Xiuyao seriously. Mo Xiuyao shook his head. His expression was relaxed as he smiled. "It's fine. Since you don't mind, then forget it." After all, Han Mingyue isn't someone you can offend. Yili raised an eyebrow. You don't seem to be surprised at his relationship with Han Mingyue? When I was young, I had a bit of friendship with Han Mingyue. Yili understood. For Emo Shuyao to admit that he had a bit of friendship with her, it definitely wasn't a normal friendship. Prince, we've arrived at the Li Palace. As the two of them chatted idly, they had already arrived outside the Li Palace. The two of them weren't talkative people, but Yili found that talking to Emo Shuyao was never boring. Li. Yili was about to get out of the carriage when Emo Shuyao suddenly called out. Yili turned around and looked at him in confusion. Emo Shuyao looked at her quietly. Are you really ready? Do I need to prepare anything? Yili raised her eyebrows. For a moment she couldn't remember if she had really forgotten anything. Emo Shuyao was taken aback. Then a faint smile appeared on his face as he said softly, It's nothing. You may leave. Since Prince Ding had personally congratulated her, the Li Palace naturally could not neglect it. Especially now that Prince Ding had not appeared in the capital for nearly 8 years. Personally attending Prince Li's wedding could be said to be giving Prince Li enough face. And according to the seniority of the imperial family, Prince Ding, who was about the same age as King Li, was of the same generation as King Li. Thus, not only King Li himself, even the imperial relatives who had come to attend the wedding also came out to welcome him. The Ding King's residence did not have any ostentation, and under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the first person to alight from the horse carriage was a young lady dressed in purple. Her lilac-colored dress was embroidered with elegant lotus flowers. Her hair was loosely tied up and the jeweled butterflies in her hair were dazzling. Just by slightly tilting her face, everyone could see a beautiful face with light makeup. Very quickly, 2 guards lifted up the curtain of the horse carriage and gently lifted Emo Shuyao and the wheelchair that he was sitting on out of the horse carriage. Emo Shuyao indifferently swept his gaze over the stunned people at the entrance of the Li Palace. He turned his head to look at Yili, who was standing by the side, and extended his hand towards her. Yili raised her hand and allowed Emo Shuyao to hold her hand. Behind her, Ajin had already pushed the wheelchair towards the entrance of the Li Palace. Cough. Greetings to Prince Dingguo. Finally someone reacted. Glancing at the unresponsive King Li, who was still staring at the approaching Prince Ding, the person who regained his senses gave a light cough as a reminder to the host to welcome the guest. Greetings to Prince Dingguo. Today is King Li's wedding, no need to be so courteous, Emo Shuyao said warmly, and then looked at Emo Jingli with a smile. Jingli, congratulations. Many thanks. Emo Jingli glared viciously at Yili, who was standing next to Emo Shuyao, and said through gritted teeth. Emo Shuyao raised an eyebrow. You're not inviting us in? Emo Jingli could only move to the side and let the two in. But he was not willing to say another word. Emo Shuyao clearly understood Emo Jingli's temper. He raised his head and smiled at Yili. Let's go in. Yili pursed her lips and smiled, nodding without a word. She followed Emo Shuyao through the gates of the Li Palace. Out of the corner of her eye she saw Feng Jiao standing in an inconspicuous corner, looking at the 3 people at the door with a smile that was especially annoying. Entering the Li Palace, the virtuous consort was personally waiting in the main hall to welcome them. Seeing Emo Shuyao and Yili walk in side by side, her eyes flashed. She quickly stood and walked forward with a smile. Li's wedding, it's rare that Shuyao is willing to personally come. It's really an honor for the Li Palace. It seems that Shuyao and the future Wang Fei have a very good relationship. When you get married, I will naturally send a generous gift. Emo Shuyao nodded slightly, the half of his face showing respect and gentleness. I've caused Consort Dowager to worry. At that time, Shuyao will definitely wait for Consort Dowager and Emo Shuyao's arrival. Yili quietly stood next to Emo Shuyao and did not interrupt. She didn't know why, but ever since she saw the virtuous Consort Dowager last time, this seemingly graceful and amiable dowager always made her wary. There are no outsiders here. Third Miss Yi, please take a seat. The virtuous consort dowager did not forget to call out to Yili as she chatted with Emo Shuyao. Yili softly thanked her and sat down next to Emo Shuyao. Unfortunately, she just happened to sit across from Emo Jingli. She did not need to raise her head to feel that Emo Jingli was fiercely glaring at her. Being stared at like this in this kind of situation made Yili somewhat angry. Shouldn't the people who were about to get married be so busy that they were dizzy? Why was this Emo Jingli so idle as to sit here and listen to people bicker? Oh, what's wrong with Jingli? Why does he keep staring at third Miss Yi? An ear-piercing female voice sounded in the hall. Yili frowned and raised her head to look at that person. There were only 7 or 8 people in the hall, but those who were personally accompanied by the virtuous consort dowager were naturally not ordinary guests. At least they were not people that Yili, a girl from the minister's manor, could afford to offend. The person who spoke was also looking at Yili with a picky expression. Her phoenix pattern and peony brocade robe showed that this person's status was not ordinary. When she spoke, the people who were originally focused on Mo Shuyao, who had not been seen for a long time, immediately looked at Yili. That person was not prepared to leave the matter at that. Her shrewd phoenix eyes revealed a cold light as she laughed softly and said in a sharp voice, "Speaking of which, I almost forgot. Isn't third Miss Yi Jing Li's ex-fiancée?" Presumably, Jing Li is just curious about the new #1 talented woman in the capital. Isn't everyone here curious as well? Mo Shuyao's voice faintly sounded in the hall. His voice seemed to be gentle without any anger, but it was clear that he was protecting his fiancée. Yili lowered her head and silently looked at her hand being held by a slightly cold hand. Prince Ding is right. Third Miss Yi is the one who really shocked the world with a single brilliant feat. Thinking back, Madame Yi was also a quiet and uncompetitive person, but her literary talent is still fresh in our memories. The white-haired old madam sitting at the front laughed loudly and looked at Yili with a kind gaze. Yili smiled faintly. Old madam is too kind. Yili can't compare to my late mother's grace. I only hope that I can inherit 1 or 2 parts of it. The old madam nodded in praise and said, "You are a humble and good child." Chapter 49. This is the old madam of Hua State. Mo Shuyao introduced her to Yili in a soft voice. Only then did Yili realize that this woman was actually Tianxiang's grandmother. Then Mo Shuyao introduced Yili to each of the people present. Unsurprisingly, they were all relatives of high officials or members of the royal family. The woman who spoke first was the Emperor and Prince Li's aunt, Princess Zhaoran. She was also Princess Ronghua's biological mother. Thinking of Princess Ronghua's arrogant appearance at the 100-Flower Festival, Yili could only sigh. They were indeed mother and daughter. But she didn't know why Princess Zhaoran was so obviously hostile to her. It couldn't be because of Princess Ronghua, right? When Mo Shuyao introduced Yili, the people present secretly re-evaluated the third young miss of the Yi family who was rejected by Prince Li and then married to Prince Ding. Prince Ding personally introduced her to the most powerful nobles of the Dechu state, which was enough to show how much importance he attached to her. Therefore, except for Mo Jingli, whose face was even uglier, the atmosphere in the hall was as harmonious and friendly as always. Yili. In the garden of Prince Li's mansion, Hua Tianxiang pulled Yili and walked while talking. Suddenly, a tall figure appeared in front of them and blocked their way. "Your Highness Prince Li, what's the matter?" Hua Tianxiang stood in front of Yili and raised her beautiful face to ask. Since the incident at Chuxiang Pavilion, Hua Tianxiang's favorable impression of Prince Li had plummeted and was now close to negative value. Seeing Mo Jingli appear in front of them with an unfriendly expression, she only thought that he wanted to make trouble for Yili. Mo Jingli frowned unhappily. "I am not looking for you," Hua Tianxiang said without any trace of politeness. "Shouldn't Prince be greeting guests now?" Most of the women in this garden were from various manors, so it would be inconvenient for the prince to enter and leave. Even if Prince doesn't care about his own reputation, he should at least care about others. "I have something to say to Yili. Move aside," Mo Jingli said impatiently. "Just say what you want to say." "Li can hear you," Hua Tianxiang said. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes dangerously. "I said move." Hua Tianxiang still wanted to say something, but Yili pulled her back. "Tianxiang, go and see if Murong and the others have arrived. I'll be right there." "But..." Hua Tianxiang glanced at Mo Jingli worriedly. Yili said with a smile, "Don't worry, Xiuyao will come to find me after he's done talking with old Madame Hua." Hearing this, Hua Tianxiang blinked her eyes at Yili playfully and said with a teasing tone, "Xiao? Yeah, I'll go find Murong. Be careful." After saying that, she gave Mo Jingli a warning look, then waved to Yili and turned to leave. Looking at Hua Tianxiang's rare childish behavior, Yili found it funny, but she was also very touched. Hua Tianxiang was a real girl from a noble family. If it weren't for herself, she would never take the initiative to provoke Emo Jingli. Looking at Hua Tianxiang's departing figure, Emo Jingli's originally gloomy face could drip ink. When Hua Tianxiang disappeared into the garden, Yili put away the smile on her face and turned to look at Emo Jingli. "Prince, what do you want to say?" "Yili, good job." Emo Jingli gritted his teeth. Yili looked at Emo Jingli from head to toe and said gently, "I don't understand what Prince is talking about." "Humph. Do you think I will just let go of what happened last night?" Emo Jingli stared at her and sneered. "I thought." It wasn't Prince's turn to say these words. It was clearly him who found people to kidnap her and wanted to do something bad to her. Why did it seem like she had done something wrong to him? What was wrong with this world? Yili couldn't help but wonder. "Don't tell me you want to take revenge on I?" Emo Jingli ridiculed disdainfully. "That's not necessary. It's not a big deal. This girl will take revenge on the spot. If Prince doesn't have anything else, Yili will take her leave." "Stop right there," Emo Jingli said angrily. He grabbed Yili and pushed her behind the fake mountain. Yili looked down at the hand holding her wrist and her face darkened. "Your Highness Prince Li, please have some self-respect." "Self-respect?" Emo Jingli sneered disdainfully. "Who do you think you are? You're just a woman that I don't want. Do you think you can do anything just because you're related to Emo Xiao? Tell me, if someone comes over and sees this, do you still have the face to marry Emo Xiao? Or should I say even that trash Emo Xiao will despise you?" Yili's half-closed eyes flashed with danger. "Your Highness Prince Li, please let me go." "What can you do if I don't let you go?" Emo Jingli sneered. He looked at the delicate woman in front of him as if he was looking at a caged bird. It was a pity that he didn't know that the woman in front of him looked delicate and graceful, but inside she was a falcon that could devour people. Yili's lips curled up. "How is it?" "Like this." Her free hand grabbed Emo Jingli's arm with agility and strength. With just a little bit of force he felt a piercing pain. Before Emo Jingli could react, he was thrown to the ground. What was even more unfortunate was that because the two of them were standing under the fake mountain, the back of Emo Jingli's head hit the fake mountain and he fainted on the spot. Yili also didn't expect this to happen. She immediately retracted her attack and bent down to check that Emo Jingli was fine. Then she stood up and lifted her leg to kick Emo Jingli a few times to appease her anger. Her previous profession made her more familiar with the human body than most people. Naturally, she knew how to inflict pain without leaving a scar. After calming down the anger in her heart, Yili couldn't help but frown. It wasn't a good thing to knock out Prince Li in the princely manner, especially on the day of his wedding. However, it wasn't an unexplainable problem. Glancing at the unconscious person on the ground, Yili calmly stepped over the obstacle and calmly walked out. After leaving the fake mountain and passing through a few corners, she saw Hua Tianxiang and Mu Rongting waiting there with worried expressions. Seeing Yili walk over, they quickly went up to her. "Lili, are you all right? Did Prince Li do anything to you?" Mu Rongting anxiously grabbed Yili and asked. Yili smiled. "Don't you see that I'm fine? What can he do to me in broad daylight?" Mu Rongting smiled embarrassedly. "I thought too much. However, you should stay away from Prince Li." Hua Tianxiang nodded in agreement and curiously asked, "Why are you done so quickly?" Yili spread her hands and said, "There wasn't much to say in the first place. Let's not talk about these dampeners. Let's go sit down and drink some tea. I really envy Jing. Lord Qin never forces Jing to attend a banquet she doesn't like." Yili nodded and walked with the two of them to a place with many people. The wedding was held as scheduled. This made the wedding, which was a little awkward because they had missed the wedding, look forward to a happy ending. That was if they could ignore Prince Li's face, which looked more like he was attending a funeral. Yili sat next to Hua Tianxiang and saw Emo Xiao looking at her with a smile. Then his gaze moved to Emo Jingli, who was holding a piece of red silk and walking side by side with Yi Ying. The smile in his eyes deepened. Almost immediately, Yili understood that Emo Xiao must have known about what happened to Emo Jingli in the afternoon. However, seeing Emo Xiao's gaze, Yili felt that perhaps the matter wasn't over yet. Chapter 50. So halfway through the ceremony, Yili was not surprised at all when the master of ceremonies called for the couple to bow to each other, and then the groom fell to the ground with a plop. Instead, she had a feeling that this was indeed the case. At this moment, Yili absolutely believed that Mo Jingli probably did not want to hold another wedding in his life. Anyone who fainted 3 times in less than 24 hours before and after a wedding would have some kind of trauma. How could this be? Murongting was so shocked that she almost could not close her mouth. Hua Tianxiang was also stunned. She did not know what to say. In fact, she began to sympathize with Ying. It was bad enough that the groom missed the auspicious time, but the groom fainted during the wedding. Phew. Li Wang's health is too poor. Fortunately, everyone was stunned by this sudden change. Only Xian Zhao Taifei reacted and hurriedly sent the bride and groom back to their rooms, and called for the imperial physician. The groom fainted, but the wedding banquet still had to continue, but the guests were somewhat tasteless. The noblewomen guessed the real reason for Li Wang's fainting, and thought about the latest gossip that would appear in the capital tomorrow. Yi Li mentally simulated the consequences of making Mo Jingli faint this afternoon. She felt that there was no big problem, and then enjoyed the delicious food with Hua Tianxiang and Murong Ting. When she glanced at a certain smiling man in an inconspicuous corner and shook a toast to her, she nodded slightly in return. This wedding was really interesting. Miss Madam is here. In the comfortable and elegant Qing Yi pavilion, Yili was holding a needle and thread and thinking about the embroidery in her hands when Qing Xia came in to report. Yili put down the embroidery and looked up. How does she have time to come here? Ever since the blunder at Yi Ying's wedding 2 days ago, Wang Shi had been the busiest mess. These 2 days there was news in the Fu that concubine Zhao's child and Yi Rong's were incompatible, and it was even more chaotic. Minister Yi also had a headache. On one hand, it was the daughter and only son of Princess Li. On the other hand, it was the most favored concubine and future son. It wasn't that Minister Yi couldn't tell which was more important. But looking at concubine Zhao's weeping face, he still couldn't bear to part with her. Unfortunately, on the second day of Yi Ying's wedding, Yi Rong was inexplicably startled by the carriage on his way to school. He was so frightened that he had to lie in bed for 2 days. Wang Shi made an even bigger fuss. When Wang Shi walked in, she had a rare amiable look on her face when she faced Yi Li. Unfortunately, Yi Li was neither a concubine-born child who had to live at her whims, nor was she a pitiful young girl who didn't know anything. Therefore, she only stood up and greeted her indifferently. Fourth sister is about to return home. How come Madam has the time to come over? With what she thought was an amiable smile, Wang Shi said, the Prince Ding mansion has already chosen a date, and the betrothal gifts will be delivered in 2 days. Li, your wedding date is near. I came to see if there is anything that hasn't been fully prepared. Yi Li asked Wang Shi to sit down and said, Mother Lin and the wet nurse will take care of it. Aunt and Aunt have also come to check on it several times. There is no problem. Thank you for your concern. The smile on Wang Shi's face stiffened. Yi Li's words sounded like she was saying that she had neglected her duty as a legal mother. In fact, Yi Li didn't have such an idea in her heart. Because in her heart she never thought that Wang Shi had the obligation to organize her wedding. As long as her face was acceptable, it was fine. Shi, I came here today to discuss something with Yi Li. Wang Shi quickly regained her composure and looked at Yi Li eagerly. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at her in confusion. Wang Shi sighed. Li, you must have heard about what happened in the past few days. It's not that I, as the legal wife and legal mother, can't tolerate it. It's just that Zhao's child is at odds with the Yi family's legal child. The day before yesterday I specially went to Master Ling Su of the Water Cloud Temple. He said that Zhao's child had a grudge with our family in her previous life. She was born to harm our Yi family. Ever since the news of her pregnancy spread, our family has been in trouble. But Master still blindly protects her. Yi Li calmly listened to Wang Shi ramble on about her dissatisfaction with Zhao and Minister Yi. Wang Shi deliberately brought up the fact that Zhao's child was at odds with the Yi family's legal child. In terms of legal children, who in the Yi family was more authentic than Yi Li? If she didn't know and didn't believe these things after seeing Yi Ying's unlucky wedding, she was afraid that she would have a grudge against Zhao and her child. Madam, what do you mean? No matter what, that child is our Yi family's flesh and blood, and also Li Er's biological brother. Father naturally loves him. Yi Li lightly threw the question back to Wang Shi. If Zhao hadn't been on guard against Wang Shi and couldn't find a chance to make a move, why would she come to discuss with her? If she really fell for it and gave her advice, if something happened in the future, she would naturally have to bear the consequences. Wang Shi was startled. She gritted her teeth and forced a smile. No matter what, I'm afraid that child is. Ying's matter has already caused the Yi family to lose face. If something happens to Li Er's marriage, our family will really lose face. Yi Li lowered her eyebrows and smiled faintly. I'm afraid I can't make the decision on this matter. Madam, you should discuss it with father and grandmother. A woman should follow her husband. Li Er's wedding has no face to speak of. After getting married, she changed her surname to Mo. Even if that child really wanted to jinx someone, it should be someone with the surname Yi first, right? Seeing that Yi Li was so stubborn, Wang Shi also knew that she couldn't get the result she wanted here. She pretended to comfort Yi Li for a while before holding the almost deformed handkerchief in her hand and left. Miss Wang Shi's intentions are so sinister. You must not be fooled by her. As soon as Wang Shi left, Mother Lin and Mother Wei came out from the inner room. Mother Wei said with a face full of anger. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and smiled. Nanny, did you see through her intentions? Mother Wei said, what other intentions can there be? She wants to harm concubine Zhao, but she dragged Miss into it. If Miss is soft-hearted and really listens to her words in the future, when word spreads that a woman interferes with her father's affairs and is heartless to her stepmother and stepbrother, it will ruin Miss's reputation. Mother Lin smiled and comforted Mother Wei. Younger sister, don't be anxious. I think Miss must have a plan in mind. Yi Li nodded and said, Wang Shi certainly can't tolerate concubine Zhao. It's just that there are so many things going on in the Fu right now that she doesn't have the opportunity to act. Mother Lin thoughtfully said, Miss means to save that concubine Zhao? Yi Li shook her head and said, it can't be counted as saving her. These days concubine Zhao has also helped me a lot. What's more, I think Rong has been taught by Madam to be somewhat improper. Yi family still has a trace of descendants in the future. Mother Lin said, I'm afraid that concubine Zhao will be ambitious in the future. Yi Li waved her hand and smiled. If she's smart, she should know that I have no conflict of interest with her. Chapter 51. Mother Lin thought for a while and smiled. Miss, you are thoughtful. Launa worried too much. Yi Li smiled and shook her head. I'm still young. There are always things I can't consider. In the future I'll need more advice from mother and wet nurse. In the evening, Wang Shi somehow persuaded Minister Yi to send concubine Zhao back to the Yi family's old house to wait for delivery. Concubine Zhao naturally cried and begged for a long time. The remaining concubines looked at her miserable appearance and couldn't bear it. Yi family's old house wasn't a flat and rich land. It was Bingzhou in the southwest of Dechu State near the border. Not only was it barren, but it was also thousands of miles away from the capital. Since Minister Yi came to the capital and took old Madam Yi over, the Yi family never returned to their old house. In the early years, even the ancestral hall was moved to the capital. In Bingzhou there was only an old house and some land left for the family to take care of. Not to mention whether concubine Zhao could live well when she went back, whether she could survive the journey while pregnant was a test. Minister Ye's expression was also somewhat unbearable. But looking at his former beloved concubine begging, he didn't relent. Yi Li looked at concubine Zhao's expression faintly. The initial sadness gradually turned into despair. Although there was an element of acting, there was obviously some real feelings in it. Minister Ye's ruthlessness also made concubine Zhao feel bitterly disappointed. Father. Seeing that it was enough, Yi Li said, Bingzhou is far away. The journey is also very difficult. Even ordinary people may not be able to bear it. Not to mention concubine Zhao is pregnant. Minister Ye's expression changed slightly. He looked at Yi Li and said, Li Er, what do you think? Yi Li lowered her eyes and said faintly, since Madam's intention is to send concubine Zhao away from the capital, why do we have to send her to Bingzhou? What if there is something on the road? Sister Zhao Yi is pregnant now. We have to accumulate blessings for her. Wang Shi's face turned white. Her heart trembled with anger. What did she mean by her idea? She even cursed her precious daughter and grandson. Old Madame Yi frowned and said, Then Lear, where do you think is suitable? Yi Li smiled faintly and said, although we can't not believe in fate, we can't completely believe it either. No matter what, concubine Mother Zhao is still pregnant with our Yi family's child. If outsiders were to find out about this, they would say that the Yi family doesn't care about kinship. As for where concubine Zhao will go, I'm sure father and grandmother have their own plans. Minister Yi took a deep look at Yili and his eyes were obviously probing. Our family has another courtyard in Yunzhou, and the climate in Yunzhou is also very pleasant. Why don't we send the Zhao clan to Yunzhou? Naturally, everything will be decided by father and grandmother. Old Madame Yi looked at concubine Zhao and smiled at Yili. Your father is right. Yunzhou has many outstanding people and many scholars. Maybe they can suppress this child's destiny. Yili said respectfully, grandmother is right. As long as the Yi family is doing well, then we will be doing well, right? Destiny? How can a child who hasn't been born have a destiny? Old Madame Yi nodded with satisfaction. For Yi Li's understanding, she said, Li is sensible. In that case, this matter is settled. Concubine Zhao knelt in the hall and glanced at the unwilling Wang Shi. She bowed respectfully to old Madame Yi. This servant thanks old Madame for your grace. Thank you, Master and Third Miss, for your grace. Yili smiled. Concubine Zhao, get up quickly. This is the grace of grandmother and father. We as the younger generation can only listen. Concubine Zhao has a long way to go. Should be careful. When my brother is born, I hope concubine Zhao will teach him well so that he won't disappoint grandmother and father. Concubine Zhao nodded repeatedly. This servant thanks Miss for your advice. The servant thanks Third Miss for saving my life. Concubine Zhao knelt in front of Yili. Her simple and elegant dress was completely different from the Enchanting in the past. Yili raised her hand to signal Qing Wan to help her up. She said lightly, no need to be so polite. You don't have to worry when you reach Yunzhou. Naturally, someone will arrange everything. Concubine Zhao nodded and said, this servant believes that Third Miss's words are like a mountain. This servant will also abide by the agreement and raise this child. She lowered her head and stroked her still flat belly. Concubine Zhao's brows were full of tenderness and love. In the future, this child will be her everything. Yili nodded and ordered Qing Shuang, go and get 500 taels of silver for concubine Zhao. Take it as travel expenses. Qing Shuang responded and left. Concubine Zhao looked at Yili gratefully. The entire Yi family was under the control of Wang Shi. Of course, this included the various villages. It was inevitable that Wang Shi would secretly deduct her expenses. Although she had saved some money herself, it wasn't much. In the entire Yi family, other than the old matriarch and master, only Third Miss could take out such a large sum of money at once. Concubine Zhao understood in her heart that although Third Miss wasn't a warm and amiable person, as long as she was well behaved, she was definitely a reliable and trustworthy person. Many thanks for Third Miss's pity. When you get there, someone will be responsible for your and your child's safety. With father there, she won't dare to be too brazen. But if you want to live well there, it will depend on your own methods. Yili reminded lightly. In any case, the village wasn't hers. If concubine Zhao had the means, it would be better for the child if she controlled it herself. Concubine Zhao was stunned. She was secretly shocked that Yili could see through her thoughts. However, since she had spoken, it naturally meant that the Su family would help her to a certain extent. As long as she had enough means to control Yunzhou's village, it would be a place for her and her child to settle down. Thinking of this, concubine Zhao hurriedly thanked Yili again. At the same time, she felt even more reverence in her heart. Miss, the Ding King's residence has sent the betrothal gifts. Qing Yu walked in with a happy face and smiled. The old madam and master are asking Miss to hurry over. Yili nodded. Seeing Qing Yu's strange expression, she raised her eyebrows and asked, is there something else? Qing Yu's happy expression was somewhat conflicted. Looking at Yili, she said, His Highness King Li and Fourth Miss have also returned. Today was the day that Yi Ying would return home. Not knowing if it was intentional or real, the days were so coincidental that Fourth Miss's return and Third Miss's betrothal gifts actually collided on the same day. Yili was also stunned. She had almost forgotten that Yi Ying was also coming back today. What happened? Qing Yu curled her small mouth and said, King Li and son-in-law arrived at about the same time. His face was gloomy as if someone owed him tens of thousands of taels of silver. What bad luck. Impudent. Yili lightly reprimanded. Qing Yu blinked her eyes. She could tell that there was no anger in Mrs. words. Only then did she playfully stick out her tongue, cover her small mouth and hide to the side. Qing Shuang came out with a plain embroidered pouch and handed it to Yi Li. Yi Li turned around and put it in concubine Zhao's hand along with a gold lock. She said, "This is my gift to my younger brother. I won't give it to concubine when the time comes." Concubine Zhao's eyes reddened. Remembering that today was the day that the Prince Ding mansion would send the betrothal gifts, she hurriedly held back her tears and said goodbye to Yi Li. Only then did she put away the things and walked out. Chapter 52. Yi Li turned her head and said, "Let's go and see grandmother." Because there was no one in the Ding Palace who could be considered as Emo Xiuyao's elder, Emo Xiuyao specially invited two very famous elders from the capital to visit together. The one that Yi Li had met before was the Imperial College's principal Su Zhe and the Empress's father Old Duke Hua. These two could be considered as influential figures in the capital and also made Minister Yi feel proud. The long list of betrothal gifts in the Ding Palace reminded people of the last time when the Li Palace sent the betrothal gifts. Originally it looked good, but now, in comparison, it made people feel that the Li Palace was lacking in sincerity. Therefore Yi Shangshu invited Old Lord Su, Old Duke Hua and Prince Ding to the study room with a smile. He inadvertently neglected Yi Ying and Mo Jingli, who arrived at the same time. Li pays respect to grandmother. Greetings to old Madame Hua and all the madams. When Yi Li stepped into Rong Luhul, she saw old Madame Yi and old Madame Hua chatting happily. There were also some familiar madams below who joined in the fun. However, Mo Jingli, Yi Ying and Wang Shi sat at the side with ugly expressions. Wang Shi and Yi Ying obviously could not get a word in, and Mo Jingli's expression probably made people not dare to talk to him. "Li, come over quickly. Everyone take a look at my granddaughter." Old Madame Yi intimately waved at Yi Li. Her turbid eyes were filled with a kind smile. It was as if Yi Li was her most precious granddaughter. Yi Li obediently went forward. "Grandmother." Old Madame Hua pulled Yi Li to sit beside her and smiled. "Old Madame, don't blame this old one for snatching your granddaughter. I like this third miss very much. No wonder that girl Tianxiang has been nagging all day to come and play with third Mississippi." Yi Li smiled and said, "Old Madame is overpraising me. We are also Mrs. Tianxiang very much." Old Madame Hua nodded repeatedly and said, "Good child, you really have your mother's demeanor. No wonder Xiuyao, that child, refused to go out for so many years, but this time he specially came to invite our family's old man to propose marriage." Yi Li lowered her head. Her beautiful face was dyed with a faint blush. She chuckled softly. "Old Duke Hua hasn't been involved in worldly affairs for so many years. Li is truly." Old Madame Hua nodded secretly. Even if she was shy, she could still be dignified and appropriate. She was not as delicate as the average girl from a noble family. Only this kind of woman would be able to hold such a big family business like the Ding King's residence. She patted Yi Li amiably and said with a smile, "What's the big deal?" The old man had nothing to do now. Naturally, he wanted to worry about the marriage of the younger generation. Xiuyao was also watched by our old man as he grew up. Seemingly thinking of Mo Xiuyao's current situation, old Madame Hua could not help but sigh softly. She instructed Yi Li, "In the future you will be a family. You must live well." Yi Li pretended to be shy and silently agreed. In her heart the word embarrassed had already been placed. Seemingly thinking of the coldness of the other newly married couple, old Madame Hua turned to Mo Jingli and said with a smile, "This old one has yet to congratulate Li Wang and Li Wangfei. The Empress Dowager and Xian Zhao Taifei have long been looking forward to holding a grandson. Presumably, the two noble ladies will soon be able to fulfill their wishes." When old Madame Hua opened her mouth, everyone present also hurriedly congratulated Mo Jingli and Yi Ying. Mo Jingli's cold air was really frightening. It made the people who originally wanted to congratulate him not dare to open their mouths. At this time, when old Madame Hua opened her mouth, everyone naturally followed to congratulate. Mo Jingli looked at everyone with a cold face. In the end, he still could not disrespect old Madame Hua, so he nodded lightly. Yi Li sat next to old Madame Hua and just happened to see Yi Ying's expression clearly. Yi Li also felt a little strange. Although there was a situation on the wedding day, it had nothing to do with Yi Ying. With Mo Jingli's love for Yi Ying, it would only make him feel more guilty and treat her better. However, the expressions of these two people really did not look like a bunch of happy newlyweds expressions. Perhaps it was because of Yi Ying's almost unconcealable gloomy expression. Wang Shi's expression did not look good. Fortunately, she still knew to look at the situation. She just kept a calm face and did not flare up. Prince Ding is here. The voice of a servant's report came from outside the door. Minister Yi accompanied old Duke Hua, old Lord Su Zhou and Mo Xiuyao in. Before they came in, old Duke Hua's loud laughter came in. I've waited for so many years. Finally, I'm going to drink Prince Ding's wedding wine. What's the trouble? It's a good opportunity to see how the future Princess Ding is and how she can make my servant admit defeat. Li is still young. Old Duke, don't scare her. Mo Xiuyao's voice was faint with a gentle smile. Good boy, you know how to protect your wife before the wedding. The hall was quiet. Old Madame Hua pushed Yi Li with a smile and said, Our family's old master is a rough person. Li don't be offended. Yi Li smiled and shook her head. She looked at the door and saw a man with white hair and a white beard. Although he was close to 70 years old, he still had a majestic gait. Yi Li was born in a military family. When she saw this old man, she knew that he must be a famous general who had spent half his life on the battlefield. She could not help but have a good impression of him. Prince Li and Princess Li are also here. This old official greets Prince and Princess Li. Old Duke Hua's gaze swept across the people in the hall. His gaze paused on Yi Li for a while before he greeted Mo Jingli and Yi Ying. Mo Jingli nodded and moved his gaze away from Mo Xiuyao, who came in behind old Duke Hua. He frowned and said, Old Duke, why are you here? Old Duke Hua stroked his white beard and smiled proudly. This old man is here to be a matchmaker for Xiuyao. I'm here to give the betrothal gifts. Old Madam Yi, come and take a look at the betrothal gifts. Is there anything in the Yi residence that you're not satisfied with? Third Miss, come and take a look too. If there's anything missing, we'll immediately ask someone to make up for it. Old Madam Yi had already roughly looked at the betrothal gifts list once. How could she dare to be dissatisfied? She quickly said with a smile, Old Duke and old Mr. Su did it personally. How could there be any mistakes? She handed the list to Yi Li. Yi Li just casually glanced at it. She turned around and handed it to Qing Wan beside her. She smiled faintly and said, Thank you, Old Duke and old Mr. Su. Old Duke Hua looked at Yi Li and turned back to Mo Xiuyao. He nodded and smiled. The Yi family really knows how to teach girls. Xiuyao is so lucky. Mo Xiuyao glanced at Yi Li and smiled without saying anything. Su Zhe also agreed and smiled. Old Duke is right. Third Miss is outstanding in poetry, calligraphy, and painting. Yi family has a good upbringing. After another round of praise and modesty, old Madame Hua sent the two bride to be out with the reason that they should cultivate feelings before marriage. Standing outside Lu Rongtang, Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao couldn't help but look at each other. Finally, it turned into a faint smile. Let me do it. Yi Li walked behind Mo Xiuyao and took over Ajin's position. Ajin hesitated for a moment and didn't immediately let go. Mo Xiuyao raised his hand and said, Ajin, you can leave first. The young man looked at Yi Li with a hint of surprise on his face. Then there was some respect that wasn't there before. He respectfully handed the wheelchair to Yi Li, turned around and disappeared in front of the two people. Yi Li slowly pushed the wheelchair along the flat path to the garden. Mo Xiuyao slightly tilted his head and said softly, If you're tired, you can stop. Shui. I can do it myself. Chapter 53. I know, but you should also know that I'm not a weak lady from a respectable family. Yi Li smiled. The wheelchair was clearly made with care and it didn't take much effort to push it. Yi Li also believed that even without anyone pushing the wheelchair, Mo Xiuyao would still be able to move freely. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent his trusted aide away. Hearing Yi Li's words, Mo Xiuyao seemed to have thought of something. He coughed lightly and laughed softly. Be more careful these days. Jing Li's other faults are fine, but he loves to hold grudges. It can be said that he will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Recently he suffered a few setbacks at your hands, so he won't let it go. Yi Li nodded and said helplessly, I still don't understand how I offended him. Mo Xiuyao's faint smile had a hint of ridicule in his eyes. If you acted a little worse after the engagement was broken off, or even tried to kill yourself, he probably wouldn't do anything to you. He might even make it up to you for some reason. Yi Li was speechless. So, the reason why he treated me like that was because my performance wasn't what he wanted? It's obvious. Really asking for a beating. Walking to the stone table beside the lotus pond, Yili stopped and smiled. Let's rest here for a while. It was the beginning of May. There was only a patch of green in the lotus pond, but it made people feel refreshed. The servant girls who were following them from afar immediately left after serving tea and snacks, leaving only Qing Shuang and a few others standing not far away to wait for orders. Mo Shuyao smiled. The people around you are all very good. That girl is the one outside the city that night. Her skills are not bad. Yili turned back to look at Qing Wan, who was talking to Qing Shuang. She said somewhat embarrassedly, Qing Wan and Qing Yu came with eldest uncle. Only Qing Shuang has been following me. She didn't explain in detail who was Qing Yu and who was Qing Shuang. She believed that Mo Shuyao had a rough idea of the people around her. Mo Shuyao laughed. So you're from the Su family. No wonder. Lily also had good foresight. That way I won't have to worry when I get to the Prince Ding mansion. Yili frowned. Are you talking about the future affairs of the Prince Ding mansion? She had no problem managing a group of highly skilled special forces soldiers. She could even manage a regiment of soldiers. But to ask her to take care of the affairs and properties of a prince's mansion, even if she had these days of learning and practice, she still felt somewhat apprehensive. Yi Li's conflicted expression clearly pleased Mo Shuyao, and the smile in his eyes deepened as he said, You are the future mistress of the Ding Palace. I'll tell you about the matters of the palace in advance so that you won't be flustered when the time comes. Is there something wrong? No. Yi Li shook her head. She understood the principle that she had to plan for her position. I hope I won't make a mess of the palace. I have confidence in Li Li, Mo Shuyao smiled. Yi Li helplessly raised her eyebrows. For your confidence, I don't have any reason to decline. In her heart, Yi Li really liked this feeling. In reality, she and Mo Shuyao didn't get along like an engaged couple. Instead, they were more like friends. They understood each other's thoughts and knew each other's bottom line. Right now, they might not have deep feelings for each other, but they were more comfortable with each other than an engaged couple. Perhaps they could only be friends for the rest of their lives. Perhaps one day they would become each other's family. But who could say for sure what would happen in the future? But wasn't it something to look forward to? In my current situation, it's not suitable for me to visit Mr. Su and Mr. Su. I hope the two elders will not be offended. Mo Shuyao put the teacup in his hand on the table and said apologetically to Yi Li, Eldest uncle already knows the situation of the Ding Wang Fu. They are not people that pay attention to formalities. But last time, eldest brother seemed to have said that he had gone to the Ding Wang Fu? Yi Li looked curiously at him. She was really curious how a cultured and elegant young master like Su Qingchen would express his dissatisfaction with his future brother-in-law. Mo Shuyao smiled helplessly. It's been many years, but Su Gongzi's presence is still enviable. Greetings to Li Wang, greetings to Li Wang Fei. Not far away, Qing Wan and Qing Shuang blocked the path. Mo Jingli sneered. What? I can't walk on this path? Qing Wan and Qing Shuang exchanged a look. This path only led to the lotus pond. There was no other path in front of them. Li Wang clearly saw that their Miss and Prince Ding were here, yet he still insisted on walking forward. Wasn't he looking for trouble? Qing Shuang was about to speak when Mo Shuyao spoke. Invite Li Wang and Li Wang Fei over. The two then bowed their heads respectfully. Prince Wang Fei, please. Mo Jingli snorted and walked quickly to the beautiful couple sitting by the lotus pond. Ying followed behind him and bit her lips bitterly. Mo Jingli stood by the table and looked down at Yi Li. Yi Li frowned. She was very displeased with Mo Jingli's unbridled gaze. Yi Li, sit. Mo Shuyao said lightly as he extended his hand to Yi Li. Yi Li grabbed his hand cooperatively and sat beside Mo Shuyao. She gave the seat opposite to Mo Jingli and Ying. Mo Jingli sat down without a word. Ying then walked to the three of them while panting slightly. It was obvious that Mo Jingli's unbridled pace was not something a delicate girl like Ying could keep up with. Third sister Prince Ding. Ying said softly. Yi Li nodded and smiled. Fourth sister, sit down. Have you been well these past few days? Ying lowered her eyes slightly and said softly, Thank you for your concern, third sister. I'm well. Yi Li nodded. Seeing Ying say so, she did not ask any more questions. Although Ying didn't look like she was doing well, she didn't really care about her. If Ying really complained to her, she would not know what to do. Mo Jingli snorted and said, Ying is naturally well. I wonder how Li has been these past few days. Yili raised her eyebrows and looked sideways at Emo Xiuyao. She smiled and said, "Thank you, Prince, for your concern. Other than being a little busy these past few days, everything has been well." Emo Jingli's expression turned cold. He stared at Yili for a long time with a gloomy gaze. Then he said to Emo Xiuyao, "I have some things that I would like to talk to third Miss Yi alone." Yili could not help but find it funny. From the first time she met Emo Xiuyao, she realized that Emo Jingli loved to put on airs in front of Emo Xiuyao. For example, if Emo Xiuyao was present, Emo Jingli would definitely like to look at people with his chin up and a look of contempt. In fact, Yili really wanted to tell him that Emo Xiuyao could only see his nostrils most of the time when he was sitting in a wheelchair. So, Emo Xiuyao really rarely looked up at him. Also, as long as he talked to Emo Xiuyao, he would definitely refer to himself as I. It was as if speaking this way would make him superior. In fact, everyone knew that although Emo Jingli was the son of the late emperor and the younger brother of the current emperor, unless he killed his brother and became the emperor himself, his title in this lifetime would be below the first-rank prince of Dingwa. Ying-er will take her leave first. Prince and sister have a chat. Yi Ying was the first to stand up and respond to Emo Jingli's words. Although she looked at Yili with a gaze that was so bitter that it could be mixed with poison. Looking at Yi Ying's figure leaving with a reluctant gaze, Yili sighed softly in her heart. In just 2 or 3 days, Yi Ying had changed from a proud daughter of a boudoir to a resentful wife of a wealthy family? It seemed that Emo Jingli did not like Yi Ying as much as the rumors said. In that case, why did Emo Jingli go against the late emperor's will and marry Yi Ying? Was it really just a moment of impulse? Chapter 54. Emo Xiuyao. Seeing Emo Xiuyao and Yili remain unmoved by his words, Emo Jingli angrily roared. "Jingli, you really should learn your manners." Emo Xiuyao calmly stared at Emo Jingli's gloomy face. An invisible pressure made Emo Jingli freeze. "Did the emperor allow you to speak to I like this?" Compared to Emo Jingli's gloomy and cold face, Emo Xiuyao's indifferent expression was many times friendlier even with the half-mask on. But even so, Emo Jingli was still shocked and angry to find that he felt a secret fear towards the man in front of him. This made him angry and ashamed and he couldn't believe it. His last impression of Emo Xiuyao was from 8 or 9 years ago. At that time their statuses and situations were very similar. They both came from the most noble families in Dechu state. They both had an older brother. His older brother was the emperor. Emo Xiuyao's older brother was the Ding prince. They didn't need to inherit the title of nobility. They didn't have any burdens. Even if they ate and drank they could live a life of luxury. Except for Emo Xiuyao, he was better than him in everything. So he didn't like Emo Xiuyao from a young age. When he was immersed in studying to receive his father emperor's praise, Emo Xiuyao had already received everyone's praise, including his father emperor's. When he was secretly proud of his excellent martial arts, Emo Xiuyao had already swept through the battlefield, adding even more glory to the Ding kingdom's invincible god of war. When he was young he hated Emo Xiuyao, but he wasn't afraid of him. If he didn't like him then he would fight. Even if he lost it didn't matter. There would be a day when he would win. But he never would have thought that 8 years after he classified him as trash he would actually be afraid of him. A great humiliation. "Your Highness Princely," Yili frowned as she looked at Emo Jingli's sinister expression. She didn't doubt that if they were in a different place or a different person, Emo Jingli would have already torn the person to shreds. "Prince, if you have something to say just say it. There is nothing between me and Xiuyao that cannot be said clearly." "Nothing that can't be said?" Emo Jingli quickly calmed down and put on a mocking expression. "Yili, are you sure?" Yili looked at him in confusion, but Emo Jingli obviously thought that he had caught on to Yili's weakness. "Then do you want to talk about what happened the night before Ai's wedding and what happened on the day of the wedding?" Yili looked at him sympathetically. This guy definitely didn't know that Emo Xiuyao had played a part in his embarrassing fainting on the day of his wedding. "Wedding day? Prince, are you saying that you fainted on the spot and delayed the wedding ceremony?" At this moment, Yili expresses her deep regret and sympathy. Yili. Emo Jingli gritted his teeth as he glared at the innocent and sympathetic woman in front of him. "I can't go through the wedding ceremony, isn't that what you wanted?" Yili was at a loss. "Prince, what do you mean by that?" Although Yili and fourth sister don't usually get along well, I'm not so vicious as to want her to fail the wedding ceremony. Prince is slandering Yili like this, telling me that I don't have the face to see fourth sister anymore? He wanted to frame her and make Emo Xiao misunderstand? Emo Jingli clearly didn't have enough tricks up his sleeves. Yili looked slightly wronged as she stubbornly glared at Emo Jingli. She perfectly acted out the role of a young miss who had been wronged. Emo Xiaoyao, who had originally wanted to speak up to help Yili out of her predicament, leisurely looked at the beautiful girl in front of him. Even he couldn't help but want to cheer for her wonderful performance. It seemed that Yili really didn't need him to give her any pointers. She could handle most things better than he expected. Just as Emo Jingli was about to fly into a rage again, Emo Xiaoyao spoke up. You don't have to be like this, Li Li. No matter what others say, I will always believe in Li. Yili lowered her eyes and softly said, It's great that Xiaoyao believes in me. Otherwise, I really don't know what to do. Yili, good job. Emo Jingli finally threw down these words and left like a gust of wind. Yili helplessly shrugged and lightly sighed. If you offended someone like Emo Jingli, he would hold a grudge until death. Unless you were willing to throw yourself into the mud to apologize to him and let him humiliate you. Just a normal retreat was definitely not enough. And this person had extremely powerful backers, the current emperor and the current empress dowager. I seem to have made an enemy for you? No, he and I have never been friends. Emo Xiaoyao indifferently said. Yili blinked. Can you tell me about it? When I was young, he hid my homework and caused me to be beaten by father. I gave him back the beating of the previous emperor. When I was young, he suspected that I was seducing his sweetheart, so he had someone drug my wine at a banquet. In the end, he drank the wine himself. Once during a martial arts competition, I accidentally kicked him out of the ring. The next day, I was beaten by more than a dozen experts from the imperial palace. 10 days later, Feng Jiao and I hung him up on a big willow tree in the capital. And it just happened that his sweetheart saw it. As expected, the hatred is as deep as the sea. Yili was speechless. Although she had heard people talk about how Emo Xiao was in high spirits when he was young, but looking at the current gentle and quiet man, Yili still found it hard to imagine that Emo Xiao was also at the age of being mischievous. Feng Jiao told me that on the day of the wedding he found the unconscious His Highness Li Wang behind the fake mountain in the garden of the Li Wang Fu. Without a hindrance, Emo Xiaoyao smiled as he looked at Yili. Yili smiled innocently. It seems that Emo Jingli has offended many people. She could guarantee that no one had seen her move against Emo Jingli. Even Feng Jiao had only guessed it. Emo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed with a smile. He nodded and said, That is true. But even though Jingli has always been brainless, the two in the palace and the virtuous Zhao Dowager are not brainless. So, Yili nodded seriously. I understand. The two in the palace and the virtuous Zhao Dowager could be said to have killed their way out of the previous emperor's dozens of concubines and dozens of sons. Naturally, Emo Jingli, this well-protected prince, could not compare to them. Attracting their attention too much would only bring more harm than good. Lowering her head to think, Yili said, I'm just afraid that I've already been targeted. Emo Xiaoyao looked thoughtfully at the servant girls standing not far away. He nodded slightly and said, No matter who it is, they will not be reassured. They are not targeting you. It's just that you are more likely to attract their attention. Before the wedding, the palace will probably find an excuse to summon you. At that time, bring that girl called Qingyu with you. Yili looked at him in confusion. Emo Xiaoyao explained in a soft voice. Suda Gongzi told me before that the girl's medical skills are not bad. Yili understood. She raised a hand to touch her forehead. He felt a headache. Emo Xiaoyao smiled as he poured a cup of hot tea for her. He asked with a smile, Headache? Yili nodded honestly, I don't think so. It's probably because I'm not good at these things. These schemes really gave people a headache. Did these people not know how to be tired? Chapter 55. Apologies. Emo Xiaoyao looked at her indifferently. Yili waved her hand and said without much care, I'm guessing that even if the emperor doesn't marry me to you, he will marry me to someone he doesn't like. The Su family's background was too special. Even if she was married to someone, the emperor wouldn't give in. Just like the young masters of the Su family. Su Qingchen was already 22 years old. He wasn't married or engaged, but the emperor had never considered marrying him. She even suspected that the emperor hoped that Su Qingchen would never marry in this lifetime. Even if he did marry, it would be best if he was married to a woman from a family with a reputation and no power like Su Qingze. Otherwise it would be marrying a princess. Thinking of this, Yili raised her head and asked, "Are there any unmarried princesses in the palace?" Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, "The previous emperor's youngest princess, Princess Lin Lang, and the current emperor's eldest princess, Princess Feng Fei, are both 12 years old this year." What? Yili shook her head and hoped that she was thinking too much. It wasn't very likely that Su Qingchen would marry a 12-year-old girl. But there was still Su Qingbai and Su Qingyan. Seeing Yili's expression, Mo Xiuyao guessed what she was thinking. He nodded and said, "Back then the emperor and even the previous emperor had hinted that they wanted to marry the princess to Su Qingchen, but they were all rejected by Sir Qingyun. The Su family not marrying imperial daughters was a strange example among the noble families of Dechu state. It had to be known that marrying a princess meant that he would no longer have any relations with the court and power. He could only wear the title of prince consort and live a life of luxury. This was definitely a nightmare for the ambitious young masters of the rich and powerful families. However, many noble families were still willing to let their second son, who had no right to inherit, marry a princess. After all, this meant that the family's bloodline would merge with the imperial family. It meant that they would receive the emperor's favor and glory. However, in the history of the Su family, which had existed for hundreds of years, there were at least 5 sons who had refused to marry a princess. 100 years ago, the head of the Su family had set a rule that the sons of the Su family could not marry into the imperial family, not even the sons of concubines. Therefore, the imperial family no longer brought up the matter of marrying the princess to the Su family. The palace should already know that eldest uncle and the others have entered the capital, right? Yili asked. Mo Xiuyao nodded. Although he said he entered the capital privately, Master Hong Yu did not deliberately hide his tracks. This kind of thing couldn't be hidden if it was really investigated. Minister Yu was loyal to the current emperor. Hiding things will only make people suspicious. Yili smiled and said, "That makes sense. I still need to pay my respects to first uncle later. It just so happens that I have a lot of things to ask him for advice on. Say hello to Mr. Hong Yu for me." In Wang Shi's Fangyi courtyard, Yiying was sobbing miserably in Wang Shi's arms. Wang Shi dismissed the maidservants in the room and hugged her daughter to comfort her. What's wrong? They had just gotten married, so how did things turn out like this? Did King Li mistreat you? Yiying raised her head and looked at her mother's worried and loving face. She cried even more sorrowfully, sob. "Mother, is so miserable. What's wrong? Did King Li really mistreat you? Good daughter, don't be afraid. Let's go back and tell your father. Your father loves you the most. He will definitely stand up for you," Wang Shi hurriedly said. Yiying wiped her tears and cried, "What can father do? What does he dare to do to the Li Palace? When the Li Palace casually sent the betrothal gifts, he didn't say anything. Father doesn't love me at all." Wang Shi was speechless. Saying that the Li Palace's betrothal gifts were poor was only relative to the grandeur of the Prince Ding mansion. With the betrothal gifts personally handled by the virtuous consort, it was impossible for the Li Palace to lose face. Moreover, Ying was very satisfied at that time. However, now that she saw the Prince Ding mansion solemnly invite Duke Hua and Old Master Su to send the betrothal gifts, Ying felt that she could not compare to Yi Li and lost face. Although Wang Shi felt somewhat uncomfortable in her heart, she still knew the severity of the matter. She gently patted Yi Ying's back, who was choking with sobs, and said, "Silly child, how can you blame your father for this? There was nothing wrong with the Li Palace's betrothal gifts. You know it yourself, don't you? If there was something wrong, how could your father and grandmother let you get married like this? It's just that Yi Li's wedding date is set after yours. Even if the Prince Ding mansion wanted to maintain their face, they had to let her get a better betrothal gift than you. But think about it, other than the betrothal gifts, what else does she have? King Li is the emperor's younger brother. He is skilled in both civil and martial arts. His appearance is also one of the best in the capital. That Prince Ding is now just an idle prince with no power or influence. He is also in a wheelchair and has a disfigured face. No matter what, you are much better than her, aren't you?" Ying bit her cherry lips in grievance and said softly, "But Prince Ding mansion still has a few concubines." Wang Shi was stunned and then laughed. She hugged Ying and said with a smile, Silly daughter, which man doesn't have a few women in his room? You have to remember that you are King Li's wife. Don't you see that we also have a lot of women in our family? So what? Aren't they all obedient to me? Come tell your mother how you've been these past few days. When it came to Yi Ying's newlywed life, it could not be described with the word miserable. On the day of the wedding they missed the auspicious hour and the groom fainted. After Mo Jingli fainted he was sent back to the bridal chamber. He asked the imperial physician to take medicine, but he did not wake up. As a newlywed wife, Yi Ying could only take off the red veil herself and then take care of her unconscious husband with an empty stomach. When Mo Jingli woke up it was close to 5 o'clock. Not to mention the bridal chamber, Yi Ying did not even have time to rest. She hurriedly dressed up and went to pay respects to Xian Zhao Dowager Consort. Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was not satisfied with this daughter-in-law. Looking at Yi Ying's ugly face that could not be hidden even with heavy makeup, she exploded on the spot. She criticized Yi Ying's clothes and behavior. The most unbearable thing for her was that the one being compared by Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was Yi Li, who Yi Ying hated the most. Yi Ying, who was originally confident in herself, heard Xian Zhao Dowager Consort talk about how Yi Li was elegant and dignified when she saw her yesterday, and how frivolous and rude Yi Ying was. How Yi Li spoke appropriately and how Yi Ying did not know when to stop. Yi Ying finally could not help but explode and talk back. Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was furious and made Yi Ying kneel for a quarter of an hour when she served tea. In the end, Mo Jingli waited impatiently and let Yi Ying get up. If it was Yi Li she would definitely tell Yi Ying, "Poor child, you have been fooled by Xian Zhao Dowager Consort. She deliberately tormented you." Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was like a fish in water in the palace for decades. How could she get angry so easily? It was obvious that she deliberately picked on Yi Ying's weakness and took the opportunity to attack Yi Ying. It could also be said that she wanted to give her a show of strength. If the unlucky things stopped here, Yi Ying would not do anything. However, when she finally returned to her courtyard after serving the dowager imperial concubine for breakfast, she saw 4 or 5 women dressed in bright and beautiful clothes waiting for her. Each of them had their own merits. Yi Ying almost spat out a mouthful of blood. She never knew that Mo Jingli already had 5 concubines before the wedding. And she could not do anything to these concubines because they were either bestowed by Xian Zhao Dowager Consort or Empress Dowager. They were either the legitimate daughters of small officials or the daughters of concubines of high officials. Yi Ying kept recalling her grandmother's teachings. She used all her strength to suppress her anger and deal with those women. When she returned to her room, what waited for her was not the gentle new husband, but the chief steward and the steward of the manor holding the cold account books. Yi Ying was indeed a talented woman skilled in zither, chess, calligraphy and painting. But she was not good at managing the household and accounting. She used to dislike these tacky things because they would tarnish her elegant temperament. But under the frown of Xian Zhao Dowager and the stewards, she felt for the first time that she was an idiot. 2 days later, before she could figure out the account books that seemed to never be finished, Xian Zhao Dowager Consort coldly told her that she did not need to manage these accounts anymore. Yi Ying breathed a sigh of relief but also understood that she had lost the right to manage Li Wangfu.